Checking audio once again. Yeah, please leave the setup as it is now. Thank you.
I think we should keep that. I think we should. Yes. Okay. Okay, so then the people know that. Yeah. Then we leave then the mic.
Let's start.
Right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the start of the routing working group session. No, it's not Thursday today. Everything is fine. We have another day today, and it's a short meeting. And we really expect that we will overflow in time. So therefore, we are just starting with the actual agenda.
Thank you, Ignas. Welcome, everyone. This is the routing working group. We concern ourselves with all aspects of internet routing. And as we say here, to us, payload is protocol overhead. The glue that keeps together the internet is BGP, not the DNS. Well, let's discuss it afterwards. We have a tight agenda, so let me quickly introduce my co-chairs. We have Paul, Ignas, and myself, Joop Snijders.
Goedemorgen Rotterdam.
Well, let's start with the first presentation. I would like to invite Ties de Kok from RIPE NCC to give us a 10-minute RPKI update. Thank you, Ties.
Okay, 10 minutes. Let's hope it works. Thank you all. So I'll try to figure out how this works. The next button is green. Green button at the top. Okay, this is cool. So I have three main things I'll discuss today. First of all, RPKI adoption, because something cool happened Monday evening. Second, the developments of RPKI to RIPE NCC, slightly less cool. And finally, some things that are on our roadmap. And I'm not sure if you guys heard, but last Monday at like 8 in the evening, we passed the bar of having 20,000 certificates on the RIPE NCC Trust Anchor, which really is massive growth, which we had over the last few years. And the green button doesn't work. Oh, now it works. Cool. So 20,004 certificates when I actually wrote this. And we see a lot of development over growth of certificates over the years, both at the RIPE NCC and also at the other RARs. And not only more certificates, but also actually more space covered with VRPs in IPv4 and more important or more for the future, actually IPv6. But yeah, you can do API, you can adopt API, create certificates and create these objects, but they don't really do anything without validation. So validation really is more important than actually creating these objects. But gathering data about API validation is hard. You have qualitative data, you opted a few of these projects where you talk to people about API validation, ask if they implemented it, gather that. But if you deploy ROV and then at the edge of your network, one router doesn't get new VRPs, you may have kind of implemented API, but it doesn't actually work. So, but if you do quantitative measurements by measuring connections, you can detect that case. There's two main projects gathering this information. You have APNIC gathering data from serving Google Ads to actual eyeballs and seeing whether they can retrieve it or not. And you have an academic method called ROVista, which in our eyes is the state of the art for ROV filtering measurements, which uses IP-ID side channel measurements to measure between two arbitrary endpoints, and that way they can cover many more paths. And on the maps on the next two slides, I will use data from APNIC labs on API ROV filtering rates. And what you see here is that there's a lot of deployment of filtering in some countries, much less in others. And there's a lot of effects at play there. Of course, there's data. We just need more granular data here to do this investigation, because if you only test a few connections or a few users, you may miss some networks that have deployed it or not. But you also see that adoption in countries really differs depending on whether big incumbents did deploy ROV or not. And yeah, this is our region, but if you look at the whole world, you have a similar picture. Now, let's discuss what we've done over the last year. The main feature that we have deployed and which really getting used is publish in parent. We announced this at the RIPE meeting last year in May, and we were able to deploy this in production in December. And we see a lot of CAs using that and publishing objects there. We implemented ASPA, and because it's a draft, we've only enabled this in our pilot environment, and you can create objects there. And these objects have actually detected bugs in RPs, and also will enable us to be much quicker with actually deploying this when the standard is ratified. And we've also, and I think you guys have all seen the updates, started using a status page. There's more of a cultural change in the whole organization, which a colleague in our communications team, Adonis, is leading. But I really like that we're getting more updates out, small updates out to you all when we see something and can proactively inform you. And when there's a bigger thing happening, we do the same thing. And afterwards, we follow up with a little message like last week, I guess. I guess I can't really talk about us developing our RPKI stuff without talking about also saying that sometimes it goes wrong. We had a tiny glitch last week. So I wanted to explain our development process a bit more. We try to be really careful with deploying, and we run stuff in our staging environment before 24 hours before releasing it. We then we monitor the environment as closely as our production environment, and we have a lot of QA things set up, and we've invested a lot of work there over the last year. We run all major and a few minor validators, and we use API tests to make sure that a lot of events happen in this testing environment. So we create ROAS there, we create ASPA objects there with all strange configurations. We create CAs, delete CAs, create delegated CAs, remove them, create publication points. There's a lot of fun stuff happening there for the backend system. And we also do end-to-end testing. Max team is really awesome work you're doing. We also do end-to-end testing for browsers. So we test the browser flows actually work. And if you've seen a /128 VRP pop up, that's one that we use to measure the time between actually creating a VRP on our API and having it in production, having it visible in an RP. So what are we working on right now? What we're working on right now, these projects are actually ongoing, is increasing our rsync capacity, because rsync is the fallback protocol for gathering RPKI objects, but it's fallback, and that means that it's mostly idle, around 5,400 connections an hour that mostly retrieve just the trust anchor certificate. But when there's a disruption for RDP, the thundering herd slowly arrives, and we need a lot of capacity when that happens. And we are aware that right now we do not have this capacity, and we're revisiting this infrastructure to make sure we get that, or we will get closer to that. We're also working on improving the RPI dashboard. We've started working on this, and this will be a rewrite from the ground up, because the current dashboard was started in 2013, used unsupported JavaScript, and needs a full rewrite. We aim for a better user experience there, and that's also one of the reasons that the software engineering department hired new UI engineers and hired a UX designer. We will first re-implement the current dashboard, current look and feel, with small improvements to get the technical basis down. And after this, we will do a redesign. Finally, we're working on compliance in the organization, and this is a project I'm not personally involved in, so I want to get the words right. We've designed a control framework, the scope of which covers RPKI and the supporting systems. We've completed the gap analysis against the control framework, and we're now working on the implementation. Now the things that are ongoing, and it will happen soon, I hope, and probably the most interesting bit, for which I have 2 minutes left. First of all, we've received new online HSMs. We will replace our Enshield Connect 6000 HSMs with Enshield Connect 5C HSMs. The major improvement there for me is that we used to have 1 HSM in our staging environment and 2 in production, and we will have 2 HSMs in our staging environment as well. And you're like, why do you want 2 HSMs in your staging environment? It's a black box, it should just work. But in mid-2022, we did a software update of the HSM software, which ran fine in the staging environment for 6 months. And in production, we found a bug that only happens if you use load balanced HSMs in combination with the custom library that we use. So yeah, perhaps your staging environment and your production environment should be similar. I found the back button, did I? Yeah, cool. I may have been talking about the wrong sheet all the time. Nice. Yeah, we also add some new objects. As I mentioned before, we have implemented ASPA. We want to put it in our production API soon after the standard is ratified. And we also plan to add RSC support because we have seen actual use cases that people have for RSC. And I'm not mentioning BGPsec here on our roadmap, but we know there's people talking about this, and we're really curious about use cases for BGPsec certificates that would be unblocked by us having it available in our CA system, and that you cannot do right now by having a delegated CA. We know about it, we've heard about it, but it's lower on our roadmap, so it's not in this block of work. And finally, we will work on a long requested feature of integrated management of route objects in the RPKI dashboard, so you can manage ROAS and route objects at the same time. Yeah, that's what we're working on, and I have some time left for some questions, I hope.
Perfect timing, thank you. Any questions for Thies? I think we will take a maximum of 2 questions.
Peter Hessler from Global Ways. As you're familiar, the hosting of RPKI objects to the end users at ISPs has not been perfect in the entire ecosystem. Most of the issues with the RIPE hosting has been resolved, which we're very appreciative of. But the other RARs, and especially the NIRs in other regions, have had a lot of issues. Has there been any discussion about offering a mirroring service or a way of sharing these objects so we can fetch all of this information from a single location?
I'm aware of discussions. I've been in discussions between RARs where we really, and everybody's aware of the need for high quality repository services. I think the RARs are doing very, very well. I've also seen the issues with the NIRs, but I'm not aware of any work going on downloading all these objects from one place. It's an interesting topic to look at, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
If I can add to that, I believe NARs should use publish and parent. So like IDNIC or TWNIC should publish into APNIC service, and everybody will be better off.
Hello, I'm Roel Vigertjes, speaking for myself.
I see a sort of recurring theme going on that rsync seems to be a bit of a bottleneck for distribution. But just how big of a load is your rsync server actually seeing?
It's trivial, except when the tunnering herd arrives. I'm happy that there was a discussion in IETF about how long clients should wait before falling back from RDP to rsync. There's a random delay in there, and that helped a lot. But what we hit the last time we had fallback was that our storage peaked out at like 200,000 IOPS a second, and that was just what we could do. And yeah, we just need to revisit it. I think that it's possible to get the capacity there, but it's more hands-on for us to do than hosting the RDP repositories, because there we can use CDNs to offload the actual work.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Thies.
All right, so then next on our agenda, we have a talk from RIPE Academic Cooperation Initiative, something that allows for academia to present on the work that they're doing related to our industry. And therefore, I would like to invite Alexander Bruinders from Osnabrück University, who will present his work on segment routing traffic engineering.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Alex, as already said, and yeah, it's my first time at a RIPE meeting, and I want to tell you a little bit about my research regarding segment routing and traffic engineering. And I believe that most of you would already know what these two terms are, but just to bring everyone to the same page, just traffic engineering in one condensed sentence. What we want to do here is control the path of traffic flows through our network in order to achieve various objectives. This can, for example, be to avoid faulty network elements, reduce energy consumption, with a rising theme in the traffic engineering community, or to generally reduce the load of highly utilized links in the network. So with the example here on the right, you can see that, for example, if we have a failure in our network, then some links might experience unexpectedly high traffic loads, and then we might want to react with traffic engineering to relieve some of the load from these links. This can be done in various ways. So one of the first, I think, was more or less metric tuning, so just adapting the IGP weights. Then there's MPLS, and a more recent tool in the traffic engineering toolbox is segment routing. And the general idea of segment routing basically just is to add interim destinations to a packet to control its path through the network. So normally we just have the IP address or just one final destination if you want. And with segment routing, we just can add some kind of waypoints, as in the example here. We just add like 3 labels to this packet here, U, O, and S, which just means we first want to go to router U, then to router O, and then to our final destination S. And as you can imagine, this offers rather good traffic steering capabilities. One terminology that we need for my talk to dive a little bit deeper into segment routing is the term of a segment routing policy, which you can basically just understand as some form of rule that we configure on our routers that describes what kind of labels we add to what kind of packets. So in this example here, basically to add these packets to the packet, to add these labels to the packet, we just would need to configure a policy on router A that says something like, okay, if we have traffic from this node A destined to node S, then we add these 3 labels to the packet. And generally, from an operator point of view, we want as few policies in the network as possible, just to simplify the network management and make the network more clear, have less points of failure, basically. The problem, however, now with the current segment routing literature, basically is that it just focuses on what we refer to as an end-to-end use of these policies. So basically, we just have to configure these policies for individual traffic demands on an end-to-end fashion, so from the source all the way up to the destination. And yeah, as you can see in this example here, this is not that efficient because to deviate all 4 traffic flows here over the middle path, we need to install 4 dedicated policies that more or less do the same across the network, just apart from these first hops. And yeah, this has the potential to increase the policy numbers drastically. And the solution here, is the use of so-called midpoint optimization or IGP shortcut features with the basic idea of making these policies usable by more than one demand. So the idea here is that in the example from before, we no longer have 4 policies, but we have just one policy that we install on this node E here, where we have some kind of, for now we treat it as a more or less black box rule that says something like, okay, all traffic that comes from the left side of this network and has to go to the destination marked here on the right will be stirred onto this single policy in our network. So with this, we basically have realized the same routing as, it keeps switching forward without me pressing any button. I don't know. I hope it stays here now. Okay, so I don't know. It keeps switching forward, but I can also explain it here. So the general idea of this is also a more realistic example is the usage in ISP backbone networks, where we commonly have a structure like this one here. We have like point of presences where we have multiple edge nodes that connect the network to other ISPs, customers, and so on, so basically to the outside world. And these POPs, or the traffic, is then mostly aggregated at a few core nodes that connect the network to the POP. Jumped forward again to the POP to the core network. And if we want to do traffic engineering here, we have to configure very many policies, if we use these end-to-end policy functionality. As you can see here, this can get quite tedious. And the idea with the use of these midpoint optimization features is that instead we can just use them between these core routers here and can then control the whole traffic with very few policies between these core routers. Because generally for traffic engineering in these backbone networks, the intra-pop routing is not that interesting anyway, and it's more relevant how we route traffic through the network core. And the technical foundations for this already exist. So we did not invent this idea of midpoint optimization or IGP shortcut, but there are similar ideas for MPLS, I think. And recently there are also implementation efforts from, I think, Cisco, Juniper, and so on, under various names that basically is this idea. However, they are not used yet, at least not to my knowledge. So I'm from academia, so mostly I look into literature, and there's not much record of the usage of this there. If any other ISPs or operators use it in their network internally, I would love to hear about it in a coffee break. But for now, to our best knowledge, this is not used yet. And so we already have these technical foundations, but what we now need are algorithms that tell us how can we use this. I don't know, this thing seems to have a ghost in it. I don't know.
The technical staff is working on it.
Okay,
it should be a seamless transition, but our apologies for.
No problem. All good. Oh, okay. No, it jumps. It tells me to hurry up, I think. So basically, we need algorithms that tell us how can we use these features in the best possible ways. And this is what I'm basically working on. So what we are doing is we get some topology data and some traffic data of these networks that we feed into our algorithms. And these algorithms then should say, or should recommend us some kind of configuration that says something like, okay, we need to configure these policies to achieve a given traffic engineering goal, like reducing the utilization or the maximum link utilization in networks. And this is done with some algorithm engineering, some math, and so on that I won't cover in this talk here, but I want to present some of our results. What we focused on in our research were basically 3 central aspects. The first one was the general solution quality. So compared to the conventional end-to-end segment routing, okay, now it goes back. or not. It just goes forward. Okay, we wanted to look at the general solution quality. So do we lose any kind of optimization quality when we use this midpoint optimization features over current end-to-end segment routing? The second aspect was if we can really reduce the policy numbers with it. And the last point is the general algorithmic complexity, or more or less how much time do we need to compute solutions? Is it usable in practice, or is it more just of a theoretical effort? And for this, we looked at a tier 1 ISP backbone network, or used data from a tier 1 ISP backbone network to evaluate this. And here we look at the maximum link utilization over different snapshots. So here the x-axis basically are just different points of time in the network. And the y-axis shows the maximum link utilization, so the percentage utilization of the most utilized link in the network. So 1.0 would mean there's a link that is 100% utilized. And we compare this to two standard approaches to rate the performance. And the first one is SPR, so just short path routing as some kind of state of the art. I don't know if you can say that, but as an upper bound basically that we want to improve upon. And as a lower bound, we use something that's called MCF. It's just like the theoretically perfect routing that cannot always be achieved in practice, but as a theoretical lower bound to assess the quality, it can be used. And here we see that with our approach, like the blue crosses and the end-to-end segment routing, the orange crosses, we are always able to achieve close to optimal solutions. So we do not lose that much of optimization quality here. What is rather interesting now is the policy numbers that we need to achieve these solutions. So with normal end-to-end segment routing, we require between 50 and 100, and in some outlier instances, even up to multiple thousands of these policies. While with our midpoint optimization approaches, or with midpoint optimization, the same optimization quality can achieved with just a single-digit number, or like 10 to 20 policies compared to this. We published this work at IEEE Infocom last year, and if you are interested in more results, see that paper. And one last slide, or last bit of information. The problem with the previously presented solution is that it takes quite some time. So we need multiple hours to compute solutions, which is acceptable if we want to do like long-term strategic optimization on the basis of multiple days or weeks or so. But when we want to react to failures or so, this approach is not really suited because it takes so much time. And for this, we also developed a second algorithm, a more heuristic one, with the goal of achieving just good solutions within seconds. And we've shown that with this algorithm, we are able to remove congestion in our network more or less in a sub-second fashion in different scenarios like traffic changes, link failures, and so on. Again, this is also published at IFAD Networking this year. The conference actually will take place in Barcelona in 2 or 3 weeks, so you can't really find the paper online now, but if you're interested, send me a mail, I will send it to you in advance. Just the takeaway of this talk, basically what I want you to take away from here is that these midpoint optimization or IGP shortcut features for segment routing are a variation that is worth considering to use in your network, because we can achieve similar optimization quality as with conventional segment routing, but we require substantially less configurational efforts to bring this out into our network. And it also does not add that much more computational complexity if you want. So solutions can still be computed rather fast. Currently, I'm also working on some kind of hybrid approach between these two, so to combine them all into a single approach, but that's something for the future, maybe for another RIPE meeting or so. That's it from my side. Here you can again find the publications. This work was partly supported by the Deutsche Telekom. Thank you for your attention. Are there any questions?
Right, thanks a lot. And we have time for a couple of questions, please.
First of all, Tom Strix, Cloudflare, thanks for this presentation. This is super interesting. One kind of question for segment routing, I guess there's 2 implementations, SR with MPLS and CAP and SR with IPv6 and CAP. Do you take any consideration for label stack depth? considering, it's like we're getting more and more like MPLS capable devices, but not all of them have the capabilities of 5 deep stacks, for example. Is that something you take into account?
Yes, that we actually took that into account. Basically, all the results shown here are done with a label stack depth of 2, I think. So basically, just with 2 labels, or just basically 1 intermediate hop and the basically final label. All these results are done with 2-segment routing.
That's very impressive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Peter Hessler from Globalways. It's more of a comment, but earlier in your slide, you're describing what segment routing is, and that was the most concise and clear explanation I've ever seen, and actually answered several questions that I've had. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alexander Azimov, Yandex. There are 2 common ways to code your path with segment routing. It's using node SIDs and adjacency SIDs. Is your algorithm capable to calculate the optimal state if we are using adjacency SIDs?
Currently, we are not using adjacency SIDs because the problem here is that sometimes it goes against, or it doesn't support ECMP splitting and so on, and therefore all this is done with just node SIDs. Adjacency SIDs are not used, or our algorithms do not rely on these adjacency SIDs.
Okay, thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you once again for a really good presentation, and please a round of applause to Alex for this.
Thank you, Alexander. Next up, we've got Job Snijders who will talk about archiving RPKI data. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I want to talk about one of my projects called RPKI Views. And I'll explain what it does and end with a request to the community for your support in one way or another. RPKI Views originated when I discovered there was a lack of common view on what the current state of certain RPKI aspects was. There would be discussions where different instances around the globe observe different output in the validated payloads. And it was very Monty Python-esque where somebody would say, hey, I think it's down, and someone else would say, is not. And having archivers that try and slurp in all RPKI data that is produced is a solution to have common data sets to reference and research when debugging problems. It is modeled after the route views concept. I always liked with route views that for decades, they produced these snapshots of BGP data as simple tarballs, very little interpretation, and provide that to the research community, but also the operational community as well. Use this data, do with it as you like. So how RPKI Views differs, it doesn't collect BGP data, it only collects RPKI data. What it captures is the raw DER encoded files. It also contains an interpreted output in both JSON and CVS format. And since recently, a open metrics file detailing the synchronization process towards the different publication points. And then as metadata, there is a log file that shows what the execution run looks like at that point in time, a public key that can be used to verify the integrity of the tarballs and the directory listings. And this is for purposes of ensuring that you have the archive as complete as it can be in its intended state. So the public key is more for checksumming purposes than authentication. Some feedback I've received so far on RPKI Views is there was one instance where there was an outage for a customer, and the customer said, we did not change anything. And through RPKI Views, we could conclude that the customer had, in fact, created a ROA, but with the wrong origin ASN, and this hampered their ability to propagate the route in the default free zone. And having an independent archive to point you created a rule. You cannot deny this, is beneficial. And then recently, a number of researchers used the data to analyze the delays in publication times. Super cool use case. And I'm excited to see what other use cases and things happen in the future with the RPKI Fuse data. So there's a few ways to access the archive. One is HTTP. You can go to the website. You'll see pointers to the individual nodes. And if you click through, it's organized by year, by month, by day. And then you see the tarballs, each timestamped according to when the tarball was finished. You can also access all the data through rsync. Each of the RPKI Fuse nodes not only offers HTTP, but also a rsync daemon instance. And this, especially for researchers, is much nicer because you can set up a cron job and just keep synchronizing. And my hope is that people will keep copying this data into places so that future generations can take a look at this. The contents of such a tarball are as following. There's basically inside each tarball 2 directories. One is called data, and that contains the DER encoded signed objects and certificates and CRLs. And the other is output, and output has the validated data and log files and metric files. And why this mechanism is useful. The RPKI is a distributed database that might look different from different places on the planet, depending on, there we go, depending on the exact moment you try to synchronize, and there's a lot of factors that come into play. So collecting RPKI data from different places on the planet offers us more insight into what exactly happened during incidents, or can guide us into understanding how future extensions to the protocols should work. There's a few notes for researchers. Each of the RPKI Fuse nodes runs on its own schedule. Some of them run every 30 minutes because of resource constraints. Some of them run every 10 minutes. And researchers would do well to collect tarballs from, this is a exciting presentation system. Researchers would do well to synchronize the tarballs from the different nodes around the planet and compare the results with each other. It's super useful to not focus on one single location, but look at all locations and try to create a narrative from that. Currently, the RPKI Fuse nodes are located in Amsterdam, Kansas City, Tokyo, and Zurich. And I would love it if there are more nodes in different continents on this planet. Each snapshot, each tarball, contains only valid data. So it makes no attempt to store data that maybe at some point in time was valid or perhaps never was valid. Each node is a validator, and it slurps in the data, applies the cryptographic verification processes, and then the tarball essentially is a copy of the local cache of the RPKI validator. This is I set it up this way because if I store everything that's not valid, there's a bit of a risk that the archives might grow beyond what I can handle. And I also think it's simpler for everyone to understand what is happening if we make no attempt to archive invalid data. And if you're a researcher and you're going to do your thesis on RPKI and you are interested in using RPKI Fuse data, it is perfectly okay to ask me how exactly I collected the data, what the storage process is, or what certain quirks or discrepancies in the data might mean. I'm super happy to help you understand the archive better and make good use of it. So if you're going to use this data, talk to me, please. Currently, RPKI views is supported by Internet Initiative Japan, Newslocker, Jeroen Massars, my own resources, August Internet, A2B Internet, and DigitalOcean. And it is really cool that everyone came together and provided resources, either be it CPU resources or storage resources or bandwidth to make this possible. And my request to the community is, if you have spare resources laying around, or if you're a big cloud provider like Hetzner or AWS or other big ones, please talk to me. I can really use CPU resources and storage resources. The current archive already is 50 terabytes, and it is growing. And I cannot keep storing the data indefinitely without additional help. So if no additional resources are made available, it would simply mean that older data starts to get deleted, and we lose a little bit of history. Now, with that, I will open up the microphone for questions, comments, remarks, concerns, and I look forward.
Hi, Fiona Weber from Webcom. Have you made any attempt at deduplicating the data? So I see you're storing them as tar GZ files, but have you tried deduplicating them like on a file system layer or something like that?
I appreciate the suggestion to deduplicate the data, and it is somewhere on the to-do list to maybe optimize in that direction. I hope to, at some point in time, build a database where all the files are indexed just by their SHA-256 hash, and then maybe generate the archives on the fly. But the advantage of the current system is that the simplicity for researchers and operators trumps the complexity of a deduplication system. Because right now, each and every tarball is a perfect self-contained snapshot in time without dependencies on anything else in the system. So yeah, there is opportunity for deduplication, definitely. But I also, there's trade-offs. So like one of the nodes is actually a Linux box that uses ZFS as its underlying file system. And that takes a ZFS snapshot every time it executes and then produces a tarball based on that. So it differs a bit from node to node how exactly the data is stored in the backend. But yeah, it's an interesting quest how to store this data in the long term, in the long run, and keep it manageable.
Thanks.
Hi, Tim Ruijsels, Nelnet Labs. I have a question about the invalid data that's rejected. My concern is that if people use this as a public archive of what is there, then it may have some bias. For example, somebody may think that they published a ROA and then it may not show up in this archive. And then you get discussions. So I think it depends also on how well you log what happened, but I think it could also help to have invalid objects in there, but flagged as invalid, so people know where to look.
You make an interesting suggestion, and I will use this opportunity to give a brief sneak preview. So here I said, hey, you can use rsync to copy. I will remove your batteries. All right, let's try again. So here, come on. Can you control the slides and go to the one I intended? A little bit back, a little bit back, a little bit back. Yes, no, yes, perfect, thank you. Okay, so here I show, hey, you can use rsync to synchronize the full thing, and if you use this endpoint, you will slurp in like 25 terabytes of data. The first two lines, 2022, 2023, are what's archived from the perspective of this Japanese node. Ember.masars.net is a copy of the node in Zurich, so I use this node to back up other nodes. And then there is comparison.rpkiviews.org, which archives RPKI client and Routinator and produces a diff between the two every iteration to overcome the issue of, hey, is it a problem in one specific validator or in multiple? There is the RDP rsync collation endpoints, one in Australia, one in Amsterdam, where I launch instances that concurrently that do RDP only, RDP with fallback to rsync, and rsync only. And then there's a three-way comparison what they observed at a given moment in time. But these are relatively new data sets I'm collecting, so I'm not, and there might still be some work on the exact format or how I approach it. But I do try to provide a data set that offers geographical diversity, validator diversity, synchronization diversity, and do so in a consistent manner to allow longitudinal, I hate that word, long-term studies of the RPKI ecosystem.
Thank you, Job. We're running out of time. We have to close the mic, sorry. We get on with our next speaker, who will be Ben, I think. There he is.
So please welcome Ben Cartwright-Cox, and he will give an update on BGP tools. He has presented this a year ago in Berlin, and now that's his story on how he spent a year working on that. Please.
Cool, thank you. So hi, this is I'm Ben Cartwright-Cox, as you can probably read, and this is about the real-time collector on BGP tools 1 year on. So last year, in Berlin, I presented BGP tools as a whole, but also I mentioned, oh, cool, no, don't do that. Okay, I reckon it is controlling the other door. That'll be great. Well, screw the other guy. Tug of war. Stay. Cool. So last year I talked about not only.
Maybe we should switch to just asking them to
Okay,
go
yeah,
to
that
the
works
next
better.
slide.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay, cool. Next slide, please. So last year I talked about moving to real-time collecting. So I was moving away from ripe risks and root views as data sources and decided to go and build my own. Next slide, please. Cool. So if you haven't seen it already, this is BGP tools. It's just effectively an easy way to go and look up stuff in real time. So you can type in an ASN, a prefix, ASset, a whole bunch of stuff. And the site gives you nice, easy to use, mobile-friendly, mostly, views of the internet, and hopefully in real time, using its real-time root collectors. Next slide, please. Oh, did it for me anyway. So BGP tools also has had a few improvements since then. So one of the nice new things is a global looking glass, so you can use it much more similar to things like root views, the telnet interfaces. There's also a web interface if you don't want to or don't have a telnet or SSH client on hand. Next slide, please. There is also much more work has been put into internet exchange points, which I'll be getting onto later. And so internet exchange points not only now show like MAC address data, but also gives you like the top vendors, which is in certain regions really interesting. For example, certain regions much prefer MikroTik. Certain regions also prefer Huawei much more, and then more in the European regions we prefer things like Cisco and Juniper, which I think is fascinating. Next slide, please. In addition, there are much bigger improvements to things like the internal sites looking glasses. So if an ASN is feeding BGP tools directly, you can now go to that ASN's page and use, if the network has opted into it, you can use BGP tools as their looking glass, as a sort of easier way to go and find various networks looking glasses. In addition, if you link an account and a RIPE Atlas API key, there is a nice convenient interface to RIPE Atlas. So if you're just looking to do an MTR from single ASN, you can get an MTR-like interface with one click. Next slide, please. Finally, there is no good motivator than a good competition. The BGP tools also now does ranking. Now, I must point out, only one of these rankings can be changed by feeding me data, but the rest, so you have peer count, which is the one that, if you feed me data, then BGP tools will show you what it can see. And the rest is like AS cone, which is what Kaido uses in AS rank, or AS, I can't remember the name. And the second two are, so the last two are eyeball population, which answers the question if you're going into a new region, like what are the biggest eyeball ISPs? These are estimates based on ad traffic. And then there are domain records, which could answer the question of who are the biggest content providers in a region. Next slide, please. I'm not going to read these all out, but the site now does community values, there's AS set decoding. I'm currently experimenting with client-side software, so if you don't want to run things through the website's RIPE Atlas stuff, you can also provide people just a daemon to run inside your network, which allows you to do trace routes and things like that. And yeah, the rest can be there read through on the slides later on. Next slide, please. Core points. If you remember from the slide before, then there were 84 sessions established when I presented at RIPE last year, yeah. Now I have 940, and the site is still practically real time. However, I do feel like I am starting to reach the limit of networks that which are willing to eBGP multi-hop over the internet, which is very understandable for a whole bunch of reasons. ISPs have ACLs that are not compatible with sending BGP traffic out of their edge. I also am starting to believe that there is a chronic lack of data visibility for IXP root servers. IXP root servers have a huge sway on routing decisions for networks, and often are imported unfiltered. And so I think there should be a lot better eyes on root servers, and I struggle to find good data for them. So BGP tools is now moving into internet exchanges, similar to how RIPE RIS and root views operates. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide, please. I already explained that. So peering land first, sort of comparing the strategies. So RIS and root views live on IXPs mostly by default. They do have a couple of multi-hop collectors, but the bulk of the sessions are IXP sessions. They're kind of a mess of IXP peers. So people feed sessions. A lot of people are feeding their customer cone, either because they haven't fully communicated what the purpose of the root collector is, or just over time some engineer is like, oh, whoops, we're accidentally sending this entity a full table. We should undo that because we're giving them free transit when actually that removes purpose from the projects. And so IXP collectors are a different challenge to making sure that you're keeping an eye on all of your feeds to make sure they remain useful. And over time, due to a lot of them being co-located on the internet exchanges, hardware refreshes are sometimes difficult. A lot of them are at capacity limits. Next slide, please. Rough comparisons. So RIPE currently has around 1,500 BGP sessions online and about 372 V4, V6 tables, 407 V6 tables, according to their own calculations. That calculation was made a couple of months ago, so that might have changed by a little bit. So some of these sessions have issues, which I'm about to mention, but a lot of these sessions are actually genuinely really useful views of the internet. And because RIPE is in regions, RIPE and root views are in regions like South Africa, which have chronically low visibility on root collection projects. These are useful pieces of data. Next slide, please. So BGP tools is currently 99% eBGP multi-hop only. I am testing out IXP sessions right now, but I have about 940 sessions online and 634 full tables with about 920 V6 tables. This is possible mostly because multi-protocol is supported on BGP tools, so you can feed V4 and V6 in the same TCP connection. And also I support AdPath, which allows you to feed all of your routers tables at once, which really does help the visibility of various transit providers. Next slide, please. So one of the other problems with IXP root collection is there is a massive bias to 6939, which is Hurricane Electric. They are on almost all of the large IXPs. In fact, they're probably on all of the large IXPs. And they provide you around 180,000 peered V4 routes that you are likely going to import and then use. The problem with this is that if you then feed it right back to the root collectors, because if you're on the exchange, you're probably going to feed back that table straight back to a collector. So when Hurricane Electric gives you something over peering, they have masked away a whole bunch of really interesting transit routes potentially, which is a shame, but is obviously not their fault. It's a victim of their success to some degree. Next slide, please. The other problem with IXP route collection is it's really expensive if you don't have relationships with the IXPs. So an IXP membership fee itself can be more than the entire operational cost of running a collector, and that's not even excluding things like the cross-connect fee. In some regions, that can now be extremely expensive, and colo fees, which the growing cost of power is a increasing concern. So it's really interesting going through internet exchange providers on such great tools like peering.expose, which ranks to some degree pricing on internet exchanges and price per megabit depending on your usage. The problem with using things like peering.expose with BGP tools is that BGP tools will pick up a 1 gig port and then use it for 1 megabit because all it's exchanging is BGP traffic. So a lot of this is just not economical if there isn't like a special deal with internet exchanges. Next slide, please. So what is the smallest, cheapest, most insane thing that you could ship to a willing IXP that could solve some of these problems? Next slide, please. So this is a smart SFP. This is made by a Russian company, which is very interesting. Next slide, please. So you don't need a cross connect. This just goes into the IXP switch. The switch is the power supply, so you don't really need to pay for power. I guess you are hitching a ride on someone else's power. This does actually fit into the SFP MSA, so it's technically no worse than a standard SFP. And they're cheap. They're about $150 US. They run a full version of Linux. They're about the same computational power as an original Raspberry Pi. So single core ARM, 1/2 gig of RAM, running Debian Jessie. It's also a bit nuts. People, when I explain this to them, are a little bit apprehensive, which is very understandable. Something along the lines of, there is no way you're plugging that into my internet exchange. But there have been some takers, so fair game to them. I actually do reckon that most of these are fine, but I do understand that from the most point, on a practical point of view, most IXPs have already pre-opticed, I don't know how to say that word, out their switches, and so getting a one-off to replace an optic from one of these magic Pixie optics is not particularly great. Next slide, please. The other problem I forgot to mention is that the optics are made by a company who was Russian, and for sanctions reasons I'm a little apprehensive of buying those now. So there are other solutions, but they require you to get a little bit more creative. So the previous optic was, by design, a computer inside an SFP. It turns out there are other computers in SFPs that aren't quite advertised as computers in SFPs. So this is a GPON optic. So this is a GPON with MAC optic. So the idea is that you don't need an ONT in your home. You can just stick your GPON line directly into one of these optics, stick it into the switch, and you just get PPP on the other side. So it's doing all of the logic to convert those signals to synchronize up with the optical line system or whatever. So really cool stuff. These are also running Linux in the back end. These have web servers in them for management and to enter in your GPON credentials and things like that. So inside of these are a full functioning Linux system. Next slide, please. These are obviously a lot more bare bones because they don't need to do that much thinking. So they're about 400 megahertz-ish MIPS core, MIPS classic as well. So it's pretty basic, 32 megabytes of RAM. The constrained RAM and CPU environment makes this a really interesting and fun challenge to program for. Thankfully, rather than programming in C, which I'm not particularly good at, modern languages like Zig has a mostly functional MIPS target. So it's actually quite easy to write reasonably memory safe code in MIPS without using C. To use this as a general Linux box, you have to do some tweaks. You have to do things like making sure the GPON optic doesn't fire the RX loss signal so that your switch won't bring up the port. So the vendor for these, which is I think is Leo Labs in Poland, has been really keen and helpful with modding these. So massive shout out to them. I think they're just amused at what I'm doing. So similar technology to this is also available from Huawei, Nokia, and Fiberstore, fs.com. There's two competing designs for these, but fs.com, Huawei, Nokia have a separate design. They also have the same chiplet, in fact, chipset and stuff. They also seem to have the same credentials, so you can just use the same username and passwords to break into them. They cost about $80 US in optics, so they're actually even cheaper. So next slide, please. So the actual preference tree that BGP Tools currently has for expanding onto internet exchanges, some IXPs have virtual machine infrastructure. This is by far the easiest method of deployment. So BGP Tools can run an internal relay for about 128 meg of RAM and very low CPU requirements, and sometimes doesn't actually even need transit capabilities because you can hitch a ride off someone on the internet exchange. Those magic optics are very easy and convenient. They're tiny. You can ship them easily. If one disappears into the post or into customs, well, oh well. So obviously they are minorly scary. A lot of people do not want to put those into their switches. The other problem is there is only a 1 gig version of those, and a lot of IXPs are sunsetting their 1 gig port service because it doesn't particularly make sense anymore when you can buy 1 gig broadband service. At worst, I will happily ship out 1U servers and potentially pay for power if necessary. But obviously, if I'm going to do that, I want to try and hit as many internet exchanges as possible to conserve hardware costs and power costs. Next slide, please. You may have noticed on those optics that it's not really possible to store a modern internet table and 32 megabytes of RAM. So instead of storing, one of the differences between write BRIS and root views is that BGP Tools backhauls all of its BGP session data back to London where it's hosted. This is because the way BGP Tools is designed in order to give you the instant feedback, all the BGP root collectors and all the bit data has to be roughly about 3 milliseconds within the web server to enjoy a normal experience. Next slide, please. So the current progress is I brought NLIX up, and thanks to the INX exchanges, Jinx, Dinks, and Kinks, which is Johannesburg, Durban, and Cape Town are now online. In Toronto, Onyx is up online. And there are a whole bunch more. I had some great conversations with people here to bring up agreements. In addition, separate root server feeds from multi-hop has been set up. So Minap in Milan, EROX in Amsterdam, and GPC Missouri and Kansas have come up with just root server feeds. So the difference between these two is that the top point, you can pair with BGP Tools on these exchanges. The bottom one, I'm only getting root server feeds. Next slide, please. If you haven't already set up feeds, I would really encourage you to do so. Setting up feeds is very easy. You can log in through PeeringDB if necessary, or you can sign up for a full quote-unquote account. You can instantly set up eBGP multi-hop sessions. You can't set up full sessions yet. And I'm running out of time, so I'll keep going. Next slide, please. Oh, look, that was convenient. Any questions?
Well, we are severely running out of time, so therefore we have to close the question microphones. Please post that onto the mailing list.
Cool. All right. Thank you,
thanks for an excellent presentation.
Turns out this clicker and the clicker in the other room are operating on the same frequency or signal. So yeah, there's been a lot of synergy between this session and the other session. I am stepping down as Routing Working Group co-chair, and I believe Ignas wanted a minute now or later.
Yes, so it's the other fellow co-chairs, for the reason that you are stepping down. We would like to hand a small parting gift for your service to the community, and then you can carry on with selecting another co-chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Selecting a new co-chair, super exciting, and I'm very happy to report that multiple capable individuals stepped forward to make their time and energy available to this working group. And given that we have multiple candidates, we need to somehow pick which one is going to be the next new co-chair. So we devised a procedure that hopefully is fair, adequate, and unambiguous at some point in the process. Each of the candidates, one by one, is given 1 minute to introduce themselves, and while they talk, there will be one slide behind them up on the screen to support their introduction. Once all candidates have introduced themselves, we're going to ask the room 3 times to do IETF-style humming in favor of a candidate. So if you prefer one candidate over the other, hum after that candidate's name is called out, or stay silent if you prefer a different candidate. And you can, of course, hum multiple times if you like all candidates. Then myself, Ignas, Paul, Miriam, where are you? There. Will then deliberate to see if our understanding of the loudness of the humming is unanimous or not. Maybe at this point of the process, there is clear support for one candidate over the other candidates. If there isn't, we will proceed with a random selection process, because at that point in time, it means that we have multiple qualified candidates, multiple candidates supported by this working group, which means there is no wrong choice. Miriam, you want to add something?
I have a question about the first part. You said you can also hum multiple times if you like all candidates. Do you think that is a good step?
You know, I think I cannot stop them.
But you don't have to bake it into the process. I mean, I would suggest, it's your process, but I would suggest you hum after the name that you would prefer as the next chair, because you're only looking for one person. Thank you.
Warren Kumari, Google. A quick suggestion, can we maybe do a test hum for 2 like pretend candidates, just so people understand the process? Otherwise, I think the first candidate kind of gets.
All right. Warren will be our test subject. If you would...
Do not select Warren. Warren is useless. So
Warren, thank you for your introduction.
Between like Warren and Mickey Mouse.
If you are in support of Warren being co-chair, please hum. All right, not too bad, not too bad. So yeah, the idea behind humming is that it's not voting. We're not looking for absolute numbers, but it's to gauge the temperature in the room in a semi-anonymous way. Now, with that, we're going to proceed to the introductions of the candidates. Each of them will have, next slide, please. 1 minute. Tim, where are you? Yeah. And I'll start waving when the minute is up.
Did it start?
No. I'll give you
I'll go ahead and start. Hi. Why me? Let me roll. Minute is fast. So I've been working in this community for quite some time. First as a RightMCC employee, but now 5 years at Nelnet Labs. I've done a lot of work in the ITF, mainly on RPKI. I would very much, on a personal level, like the opportunity to experience the community from the other side as a chair. I also think it's a very important job to essentially facilitate the community to speak their mind. My own focus is on RPKI and routing security. I think that knowledge and my exposure in the ITF may complement the other chairs. On the other hand, my hands-on routing experience is limited. So if that's what you're looking for, then I'm not that candidate.
Next slide, please. Alessandro, will you come to the stage, please? I'm going to press start in 2 seconds.
No worries.
Yeah.
Okay, hello everyone, I'm Alessandro. I'm an engineering manager at Catchpoint since 2019. I was a researcher all my life before joining Catchpoint, so I focus mostly on my analysis on routing, BGP data, RPKI data, things like that. And during the years, I focus mostly my analysis on BGP data completeness and collecting data. And I ran the Isolari project with my colleague Luca up to 2019. So we started from scratch with that. this is my way to try to contribute back to the community after taking a lot during the last years, because I've been around since RIPE 67 and I took a lot of knowledge from here. So I hope this is going to be appreciated. Thanks.
Ben Cartwright Cox, would you please come to the stage?
Hi, I'm Ben, as you probably have already heard. You may remember me from from a few years ago with NLNOG talks around validating things like RPKI and BGP stuck routes on blog posts. You may also know me from the person that played battleships with BGP. I'm sorry for that. Please don't let that offend you too much. I'm obviously, as you saw, currently running and maintaining BGP tools. I'm very interested in routing stability and security, mostly for my own sake. I previously worked at Cloudflare, and I worked as well on the other side of the tech coin, working at a UK bank, revitalizing their data center infrastructure. Yeah, I'm going for the routing working group co-chair as a first-time attempt to give back to the RIPE community, who's helped me a whole bunch in the past. So yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Now is the step in the process where we apply a highly scientific procedure to interpret a room's preference for one candidate or another. Let's start from first to last. If you would like Tim Bransels to be co-chair of the routing working group, please hum. Thank you. If you would like Alessandro to be co-chair of the routing working group, please hum. And if you would like Ben Cox to be co-chair of the routing working group, please hum. Then I would like to invite my co-chairs to the front of the stage and Miriam, so we can have a short discussion.
I think we have a unanimous, it was a difficult choice. All of the candidates got support, which is great to see. And thanks for all the candidates who actually come forward. I think this is really good to see from the community that we have volunteers. Number two, what we heard was clearly the lowest. So sorry, Alessandro. There's always the next time. And thanks for volunteering. I was close between 1 and 3, so between Tim and Ben. But we all agreed that we heard a little higher harm for number 3, which is Ben. Thank you. Thank you, Tim, for volunteering. And thank you, Ben, and welcome as the new co-chair of the routing working group. And thank you, Job, for your good work.
This concludes the routing working group session at RIPE 86. See you at RIPE.
Not really. Not really concludes. The real conclusion will be just in a moment, but we have another important topic and the milestone of the routing working group. It's 20,000 off what? Achieved just recently?
Intermediate CA certificates?
Yes. And therefore we have, and therefore we have a cake to celebrate that occasion. So please, everyone in the room, come here and enjoy this moment.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Oh yeah.
Do not touch touchscreen. Okay, here's your HTML.
Yay!
Oh, der Timer ist noch nicht cool.
So, you test it first.
Das läuft dann. Hey.
right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the session of the IoT working group here at RIPE 86. Let's have a quick look at the agenda. So as usual, we start with housekeeping. Then we have a talk about optical wireless communication for the networking of things from Kai-Lennart Bober. Then Martin Boterman will give us a talk about sharing global good practice in IoT. I think this is also something very interesting for us. Then a few words about the working group itself, its operations, the charter. It's more like some question we have. And then since my colleague Sandosh is stepping down from his position as a working group co-chair, we have the co-chair selection at the end of the session. All right, let's start with housekeeping. So the RIPE 85 meeting minutes are online. You can all see the link in the bottom. So you can also go there, check it, see if everything's okay. Then this is the meetings validation. Oh, it's the, yeah, sorry for that. It's the old presentation. And then let's check the code of conduct quickly. So if anybody has questions, please go to the mic asking for questions. And please also say your name and affiliation. This is important also for our scribes to have it in the notes accordingly. For those participating remotely, you can either ask a question directly using audio and or video, or you can type your question in the Q&A window. And that will then be read out by me or my colleague Sandosh, who is participating remotely from India. Okay, stenography is also available. You can also send chat messages to the group or one-to-one messages. Okay, polls we don't have. And of course, you see the participant list. Okay, from there, I would hand over to our first talk to Kai-Lennart. And yeah, let's see what he's going to tell us about light communication.
Okay, just a minute. Perfect. Thank you, Peter. My name is Lennart Bober. I'm affiliated with Fraunhofer HHI and working for Fraunhofer HHI. And yeah, thank you for giving me the chance to present this talk with the title Optical Wireless Communication for the Networking of Things. The contents of this talk are as follows. I'll first give a little introduction. I'll tell you something about the optical wireless fundamentals. Then I'll say something about the applications, technologies, and standards, something about the current status, and give a summary and an outlook. So me, I'm a researcher at Fraunhofer HHI. As I said, I studied computer engineering a few years ago. And over the last years, I've been working in optical wireless communications and especially in standardization, mostly at IEEE. I'm here for my first time, actually. Yeah, thanks for having me. My company is part of the Fraunhofer Society, which is a society for applied research in Germany. There's 76 institutes all over the world, but they're mostly in Germany. My institute is in Berlin, and we're focusing on telecommunications, photonic networks, components, video coding, AI, and some other topics as well. So what brings me here? For this talk, I want to see machine-to-machine communication as a subset of IoT. I'm not aware of any very strict definition here, but the new or future machine-to-machine communication
may have very different networking requirements than classical IoT, where classical IoT, as you know, has sporadic traffic, probably not so high data rates, is more about low power. But if you have a lot of imaging sensors, maybe automation, robots driving around, you might want to have high data rates at the same time as high densities. You want to have low latencies to have control loops, and maybe even additional services such as very precise positioning. So I want to present optical wireless communication as a new medium for that. That means I'm focusing on the OC layers 1 and 2. And the goal of this talk is just to give a very basic overview of everything, the current status, and so on. So as the name says, it's all about using light for wireless communication. This is a mostly untapped spectrum because typically we use radio, and light has been used in a few devices, but typically it's not modulated for communication. There's no big regulation for light. Typically devices need to be eye safe. And we're focusing here on maybe I can have a laser pointer here. Is it that? We're focusing here on the visible spectrum and part of the infrared spectrum. Light is, as you know, very directional and easily contained, doesn't go through any walls that are not transparent. So you can achieve a very high density, and basically the data goes where the light goes. OWC, optical wireless communication, is a general term. Maybe you know the name Li-Fi, which is kind of a brand name for networked OWC, or VLC, which means visible light communication. So how to transmit data over light? What you typically want to do is to modulate the brightness or the intensity of a LED or a VCSEL laser, or just any laser actually, in order to transmit the data. For that, you need to create a real valued and positive signal. If you have a complex baseband signal, you can modulate that onto a low carrier. For example, in the graphic here, this is taken from the light communication standardization in Wi-Fi. If you have a complex valued baseband, you should typically upmix this to a carrier frequency of, let's say, 2.4 gigahertz and transmit it in radio. But for light communication, you just choose a carrier frequency that is roughly half of the bandwidth of the signal, and you just modulate it onto that low IF, and you have a real valued signal. What you next need to do is to make the signal positive, because you can't transmit negative light. That's why you typically just add a DC or some offset to the signal, so you can have a positive signal that is real valued and modulate the intensity of the LED. Then it goes over the optical channel, is received by a photodiode, and at the receiver, a high pass removes the DC, so you can process it in your receiver DSP. So you can see, basically you can just transmit most signals over light. You just need to add some little tricks. What it's not is currently modulating the wavelengths, light carriers directly. So what many people don't directly understand is we don't do coherent light modulation for now, because that would be rather expensive, but we want to focus on very cheap techniques such as modulating LEDs. This, therefore, you can just use any wavelength depending on what you want to do. Infrared typically has very beneficial properties because it's reflected very well. And you can just filter out any unwanted wavelengths at the receiver. For example, you just filter out sunlight by a passive optical filter, and sunlight isn't an issue anymore. Okay, so what is the current characteristics of that channel? Typically, we have such front ends. They look like this. That's, for example, the ones that we built. And they support, if they use LEDs, they support up to 200 megahertz of bandwidth. So you can have a single bandwidth of 200 megahertz with typical LEDs that you can just buy, that are not even especially made for optical communication. The photodiodes on the receiver have a limited bandwidth too, of course. You can see here the LED amplitude response, for example, for an infrared LED or a white LED. So you can see definitely the infrared has a somewhat better response. The optical power output is limited through the light source or the driver, of course, also through eye safety requirements. And at the receiver, the power is very limited because due to the intensity modulation, the path loss is pretty high. So if you go far away from your transmitter, the signal will deteriorate quickly. What's another characteristic is that you can shape this signal as you want, basically. As it's very directive and the line of sight is, has most of the signal power, you can just use lenses to make wider or narrower angles. You can also use sectorization and just transmit in different directions. That means you can have narrow angles to make better use of the space, or wider in order to introduce diversity, which is good against blocking, for example. So you have overlapping cones, and you can receive the light from different emitters. So you can play around with that. You can focus it very narrowly, like to go over distances of 200 meters. If you make it very wide, it's maybe just working over a few meters, 2 or 3 meters. Okay, so some key technologies or techniques for modern OWC to improve the performance are distributed MIMO. That means in contrast to radio, where you have maybe a few access points per room because they basically cover the whole room. With light, of course, you need many access points. Well, if you look into the ceiling, you have quite a bit of lights. And with distributed MIMO, you have a very tight coordination, so you can transmit from multiple of these emitters by pre-coding the signal and leveraging spatial diversity. Another one is reservation-based medium access. So because it's very directive, we typically have hidden terminal problems. So if here's one transmitter transmitting to the ceiling and there's another one, they don't see each other. They don't know when the other sends. So typically signals would collide in the, at the access point. Two modulation techniques are optimal for different purposes. One is on-off keying, very simple. It has a very high power efficiency because the peak to average power ratio of the signal is pretty good, and it has a long reach therefore. It also allows for very low complexity transmitters. The other is the good old OFDM modulation, orthogonal frequency division multiplex, that is used in Wi-Fi or LTE nowadays. That's spectrally very efficient, but it has a very bad peak to average power ratio. That's why it's not so power efficient. But if you're in the infrastructure, for example, you have a lot of power available, and you can use the bandwidth of the light channel very efficiently. Lastly, one of the newer developments is to use VCSEL lasers, vertical cavity surface emitting lasers for transmitters instead of LEDs. This increases the bandwidth by factor 10 roughly. Okay, so what are some general use cases? Over the last years, it has been said that Li-Fi will replace radio or something like that. That is not my opinion personally, but rather I'd say there's some applications that can make use of the specific properties of light. For example, it has very little random interference, so there's no radio signals coming from some remote device. It has very strict confinement, as I said. It allows thus a very high density of users, like extremely high, while at the same time keeping the data rates high. It has this high positioning accuracy that we showed. I'll come to that later. It's confidential because you can shield it easily, much easier than radio. And it can be used in electromagnetic sensitive environments. I'm not the very biggest artist, but I basically try to illustrate light here a bit. It's a bit like having a cable-like wireless connection, because ultimately you have your dedicated medium, but at the same time you basically need a kind of a free line of sight to have a connection. So you can imagine it like little cables going to the ceiling. even while being mobile. So another use case for that is traffic offloading. If you have radio and you need the spectrum for another application that might have sporadic data, but very important one, and you need coverage everywhere, you'd have hotspots where maybe you can offload data to Wi-Fi or optical wireless because it provides a much higher density per square meter. Another use case that is conceived is dissimilar redundancy. That means that you have two different media, and if you want to achieve robustness, or that the data has a bigger chance of reaching the destination, you just transmit the data over two different media, and in case one is disrupted, the other maybe still works. It's also conceivable for radio and light. Okay, so one example that we're following up a lot is industrial communication. That is meaning point-to-point communication, for example, at the ceiling of industrial halls, where you don't want to put in a new cable. You just have such point-to-point units. We're still miniaturizing them. And you can just transmit as if you had a cable there. Another one, somewhat more complex, is this multi-purpose access network for shop floor machines. The current concept is here that you have these distributed units, which are basically ceiling lights, and a central unit that is controlling them over some network. And this multi-purpose light infrastructure provides a lot of services like communication, of course. It has this multi-user MIMO capability. It has a low power physical layer, and positioning as well. I have to say that positioning wasn't shown in online experiments, but we so far performed offline experiments which showed that if you have enough lights in the ceiling, you can reach accuracies below 3 centimeters. Depending on the bandwidth, we might be able to reach even more. So this is ongoing work, which is pretty impressive, because most other radio-based technologies are somewhat less accurate. Another big use case right now is secure communication. That means for information security or confidentiality, for example, for safety authorities, or for transmitting medical patient data, and also robustness against denial of service attacks, for example, jamming of medical devices, critical backhaul links, or for example, factories. We had people come to us and saying, oh, that's really interesting because they're afraid of someone driving around with a jammer around their factory and just breaking down the production, which would cost actually multiple thousands of euros per minute. Okay, so OWC could be part of a comprehensive security concept, mostly as an alternative to RF and shielding, because it's much easier to prevent signal leakage, for example, through walls or maybe filtering foils. Okay, so after that, I want to give you a quick overview over what current standards there are and technologies. What we're not looking into here are remote controls. Of course, they're strictly speaking optical wireless communication because they use infrared lights. IRDA, you probably know this from 20 years ago, was it? I had it in one of my first phones. You could exchange ringtones with it and stuff. Or free space optics, which is basically the big brother of optical wireless communication. That's using mostly very narrow lasers and tracking, for example, to transmit multiple tens of gigabits on land or even between Earth and space satellites. So some technologies nowadays are proprietary, but there's roughly 4 standards for optical wireless communication. The first one is ITU-T G.9991. That one originated from G.HN. This is an ITU-T networking recommendation group for home networking, which was earlier used just to prototype light communication devices because it had some coax mode and you could use it. Why not use it over light? Now it was extended to support light communication a bit, but it's not very specific for light communication. Another one is the IEEE standard 802.15.7. This one mostly focuses on optical camera communication. So you have, you can use ordinary cameras to communicate. They even support MIMO by selecting the individual pixels, so you can transmit data streams in parallel. But the two most recent ones are IEEE standard 802.15.13, which was actually finished this year, only 2 months ago, and that I was working on as well. And another one that is not yet finished, but will finish this year is IEEE P802.11bb, which you probably can recognize as a new amendment to the Wi-Fi standard. So this one is aiming to introduce light as a medium into Wi-Fi. Okay, so maybe I'll go a bit quicker over this. The ITU-T standard has been developed by the Q18 Stereo 15 and is available on the web. You can just download it and look into it if you want. Originally, as I said, it was for power line, phone line coax, and now they added mobility to it. The benefit of this one is that there's a lot of chipsets available. So most of the existing products for Wi-Fi or optical wireless communication are using that standard. The idea behind 11bb is to add light to Wi-Fi by just reusing the existing physical layer and MAC protocols. So the idea is that since the light communication market is very small, chipset vendors won't go and build a whole new ASIC because it's really expensive, multiple millions of dollars typically. So they wanted to reuse the existing protocols and everything. And there's two ways. Either this is like the clean way. Either you take the IQ samples or the IQ signal and just modulate it directly on the low IF, as I said before. And there's like an unclean way, because typically Wi-Fi chipsets include the radio mixing part. This is because it's just tightly integrated, but you can still reuse it and instead of mixing up the signal onto the light carrier, you just downmix the signal, and you could just reuse existing chipsets. As I said, the standard is currently in finalization, and I guess it's finished this year is my best guess. This standard, I said, finished this year. I was actually part of the task group finishing that. And as the whole IEEE 802.15 working group is named, they rebranded themselves to wireless specialty applications some time ago. This standard is mostly for specialty applications. So it's not for the mass market. Thus, it supports these new features that are quite important for optical wireless. For example, distributed MIMO, having these distributed signal processing. Then it has the two optimal physical layers and a deterministic MAC. Unfortunately, since it's very new and rather niche so far, there's no chipsets yet, but we're currently working on developing prototypes and evaluating them, maybe fixing bugs over the next time. This is all going on mostly in FPGA and software. So as I said, the current WC market is not big, but some companies have actually working products, some kind of first generation of Li-Fi. Some companies are Signify, Pure Li-Fi, OLEDcom. We also have some products, and they're mostly based on the ITU-T standard. Since we don't have a mass market yet, the next step would be to integrate it into devices, but of course you need an interesting business case for device manufacturers and everything to do so, and the cost needs to justify the added value. However, most applications are now these that I showed: industrial, security, and some offices and schools where you have very high densities. Okay, so the technology is fundamentally working, but the potential is not fully utilized yet. For the whole industrial things, you need a very high quality of service. That would mean, in IEEE terms, time-sensitive networking. IETF term would be dead nets, I guess. And for example, the service positioning is not yet included. So another ongoing work is to integrate it with power line, actually. We actually did this in a project that we could plug in a power line adapter into a wall socket and just have an access point connected to the power in the ceiling and could just transmit data, like basically bridge a LAN or Ethernet cable over that. And then lastly, the next generation is currently being developed. That means real-time protocols, deterministic networking, positioning, and more lasers and beam steering. More lasers always being good. Yeah, that's about the current status. What I want to present lastly is the project 5G Compass, which also aims at integrating OWC into heterogeneous 5G networks. The goal is here to have all-encompassing high data rates or ubiquitous high data rates using 5G RANs outdoor and indoor using very cheap local area network technologies, among others, optical wireless communication. All these need to be integrated with a 5G core. And we're building smooth handover between all these technologies based on open interfaces and machine learning based optimization. There's a consortium of 15 partners, and it's funded by the German Federal Ministry of Transport and Digital Infrastructure. Okay, as a conclusion, one can say Light is a new mobile wireless medium for the support of future IoT with very high density machine-to-machine communication. So if you have a use case for that, think of optical wireless communication. It might be a suitable technology. A first generation is available as a layer 2 technology, and new developments are underway. The mass market is not yet established because we need to increase the utility to cost ratio in all these different applications and ultimately build OWC specific chipsets. Thank you. I'm open for questions.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Leonard. I don't see any questions in the queue. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Melissa Georgievich. This is a comment, not a question. I'm currently working on a project in university about evolution of fiber and opticals in wireless communication. And I want to say its presentation is really good and it's useful for my work. And I agreed with you that opticals is future of mobile networks and everything.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment.
Hello, my name is Andreas Fischer from Deutsche Telekom. I get some experience in optical communication via ham radio experience. And what we have seen most often that there are a problem in using wireless communication, optical communication in outdoor cases. So from my point of view, to bring in this idea into the mass market, we have to enable some features to get more stability, less interferences, and make it usable in outdoor use cases. And if we can fit this goal, I'm sure we have a very good product. Are there any ideas how to handle this?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we've got some experience with outdoors. I didn't go into detail because I guess I thought IoT here, I'll keep it indoors. We have a lot of experience with, for example, putting optical next to millimeter wave because millimeter wave is like an obvious alternative. And we had experiments that actually, if you let this run over 2 years, the properties of millimeter wave and optical are somewhat the opposite. Like if you have rain, optical works very well. If you have fog, millimeter wave works very well.
Depends on the wavelength, yes.
And so these could combined lead to like stable link. Otherwise, optical, of course, if you have fog, it doesn't work because you don't have a line of sight. You can't see through it.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Hello. Vesna here from RIPE NCC. Can you say something more about the sustainability considerations for these solutions with regards to production, disposal, and energy consumption? Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so first the production. To my knowledge, you can use ordinary components. You use LEDs for now. Mostly in our prototypes, we use LEDs that you can just buy You just have normal PCBs. But the thing is that it's not yet integrated. So mostly we're on a very small integration, and efficiency improvement would be the next step. As also using lasers that are more power efficient would be very good. Otherwise, I'm not entirely sure about the power consumption. For now, it also depends on the traffic. If you use visible light, you can reuse that, of course. But no, I can't give you definite numbers about that. It's as most electronics, the less you use, the better, I guess. Of course, if you have a lot of lights on the ceiling, you need a lot of access points and electronics. So I guess it's more something for very specific use cases. In my personal opinion, like for example in industrial halls where you'd have very specific lighting anyway, and it really serves or gives you a big utility compared to the price you pay, and in terms of resources and energy.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions for the moment? Okay, then thank you very much, Leonard.
Thank
Great
you.
talk. Yeah, and then I'll hand over to Martin. Thank you so much for coming today.
Good morning, everybody. Now something completely different. I really appreciate the presentation just given. My technical knowledge is well below the average in this room. And nevertheless, we need to stand together if we want this world to thrive with technical means. And this is why also your work has become so multidisciplinary, so relevant for the globe. And my contribution is really about, so IoT, how can we build trust, global trust in this IoT complement to the world that will help us to run the world better. So I'll go very quickly over some slides. But it's clear that all these things from a societal perspective comes with benefits as well as challenges. And this is true here too for IoT. The benefits are really that it offers new tools, new means to manage things that we couldn't afford to manage in any other ways. Use of infrastructures, measuring waste, things like that. On the other hand, it does come with the challenge. So how do we govern this in a way that the world can benefit from it, that we can trust it across borders? Because all these components come from anywhere. This could be an IoT device, and just to stress the point I would like to make, what conditions this should be standard to is very much dependent on how you apply it. Whether you put it in a child's toy or in an aeroplane or in a building, the same device may be used in all three use cases. So that's important to understand. And then it comes also with a lot of data collection, data sharing, data use, of which it should be very clear how this is done nowadays. Because in this digital world, we could make a movie of most of you if we don't have any restrictions on how that could be used. And security is key for anything we do with the internet. It's really, so my focus is on how can we address specific societal issues at a global level. SDGs is a good guidance to it. And you will find that if you think about the different sustainable development goals that are set for the world, that the world sort of agrees upon how much the internet is a facilitator a necessary facilitator to make it happen, and how much IoT in that, the component of eyes and ears and hands and feet to it, is crucial to make it work. A very simple example is agriculture, where you can have crop optimization thanks to measuring, and thanks to actors that really put the right resources in, but also in health, the monitoring and even the ability to give you the right sense of insulin at the right moment. Maybe even some in the room may carry that, but this is nowadays real life action. So there's many applications, infrastructural, indoors, and even in the body. And it's important that we consider that if we think about, so what should we talk about at global level? The light application I can see as a very useful complement in some environments, and maybe less so in others, as explained before. It's not about one thing or the other, it's about and what works best. So the global approach is very much based on the understanding that IoT is merely an extension of the internet, just like social media, access to information, and links to AI, to big data. But it does have specific characteristics that will also co-determine the future development of networks, and networks that are part of the internet, thus the internet. The collecting, storing, and providing access to many data, I mentioned already, but also the autonomy of the networks, using actuators, so things that do something, that take action following receipt of specific data, according to some pre-programmed algorithms. And nowadays, I would say AI, which has been coming up a lot. And the possibility to weaponize, in a way, even your heater at home, to put it simple, and not only talk about drones, to use against you, to attack third parties, or use your cameras to spy in on your meetings. Again, the light option may be there, part of the solution. So the dynamic coalition is trying to discuss this in a multi-stakeholder way on a global level. So have the technical community in the room, but also have the service providers in the room, also have the users in the room, and have the government in the room. And to meet on equal terms. This does require opening the minds, because yes, when I am at the right meeting, I find you use a jargon, and I've grown to be comfortable with that. If you go to a government meeting, you will have the same experience, a different jargon. But it's important that you meet and discuss these things together, because the solution will not come from one of these stakeholder groups. It has to come together. So over the years, we came to at least one thing, and that is the good practice principle. And it is that in the design and the development and the deployment of these systems, ethical considerations are taken into account from the outset, both in the development, deployment, and use phases of the life cycle. And thus to find an ethical and sustainable way ahead using IoT to help create a free, secure, and enabling rights environment, a future we want. Now, if we think of ethical considerations in a global context, it's not what you think is ethical, or what the Chinese would think is ethical, or what the Americans would think is ethical. It's about not deceiving, it's about transparency, it's about taking responsibility, accepting that, being real, basically. So the thinking, in summary, of this IGFDC IoT is that we need to embrace IoT to address the societal challenges. It's not about limiting its application, it's about making best use of it in a safe way. It's creating an IoT environment also that encourages investments, because we need IoT to help this world to become a more sustainable place. And that requires things like legal clarity and things like that. You need to, if as an investor, if as a person that want to put money in it, you need to know that it has some chance to move forward in a market, but also from a regulatory context, for instance. And the emergence of this trusted IoT environment requires more and more conscious design. When I started my career, I was still working with people who built their own PC. Nowadays, why would you? Only if it's at the university project or something you want to teach to. For IoT environments, it's often still the same. The Wi-Fi environment, as was just explained, the Li-Fi environment, as was just explained, it's not scalable yet. It's not easy to use yet. But that will come. So design by the outset to be trusted, to be used by the right level of users will be really important. And one way of making sure this world continues going is let's also make sure it's not one single choice we end up with, but real choice. So the key challenges I see today is the ethical application of IoT. So what core values from a global level in this global environment that together is shaping this network of networks that includes IoT? How do we do that? Think about it, talk about it, and continue talking about it, because we never have the final answer. Trusted IoT, security, stability. How do we ensure that IoT can be trusted, also not to be harmful to its users, nor to the wider internet? How can we ensure we can count on it to function, because it may well have some critical functions? And sustainability from the outset. Thank you for asking that question too. Anything we design today, we need to think beforehand, not only how it can help to keep the environment better, but also how it in itself makes the least use of energy and materials most effectively way. And for deployment, the last factor, it's more a global thing than per se here in the region. It's how do we make it affordable and usable wherever we are. I'm talking with a colleague from El Salvador who is really looking forward to bring this into kind of hackathons with students in this area to get a creative feel for within the region of how it can be used best. It's these kind of things that are important too. Now, why I'm standing here and asking you for a little bit of your time is because I want to leverage the work that we do and to ensure that you also, at least in the back of your mind, whenever you do something, think of this global context in doing this, and maybe even contribute to the global debate, as I know some of you in this room do. If you feel there's value in progressing an understanding of a healthy development and deployment of IoT, your voice is needed. And please help me progress this towards IGF 2023, which is an excellent multi-stakeholder platform to talk about these issues and beyond. And I got in this data set some also addresses where you can find more information and how you can contact me. So very open to any questions, suggestions, and this was my presentation, Peter.
Thank you so much, Martin. Do we have questions? Yes.
Hi, Blake with AO. Thank you very much for this. It's really helpful and informative. I think, unfortunately, a lot of the issues that we're seeing coming out of IoT type devices doing bad things on the internet often stem from the fact that they're made in like Southeast Asian countries where like basically no one from that community is in this room. On the IGF side, are you aware of like initiatives to reach out to that community somehow to ensure that like the stuff that's getting made in China and Southeast Asia actually is like malware free and so forth?
I think there's, if I get you right, and please correct me when I give the wrong answer, or but there's two things. One is that for also internet standards, they're voluntary.
Yeah.
They're based on best practice and people use it, and even all countries want to be part of it in some way or another.
Right.
Because that brings so much. And I think that is true here too. At the same time, as you may know, but I'm also on the ICANN board. In ICANN, we look a lot at DNS abuse of the domain name system, and what we can do to help protect that. I think the same thing is true for IoT, that we need to actively monitor and become aware of what is important that we need to address and need to tackle together. Because one thing is clear, you cannot just stop these things.
Yeah.
All you can do is be aware and try to guide it and maybe limit it, but you cannot even count on every government in the world within its country to suppress abnormalities or attacks or things like that. So it's about the debate, it's about the common understanding how we do best in the reality that in a global world, control is an illusion, I think.
Thanks.
So there is a high matter is Santosh online. So Michael Richardson is asking for the URL of the IGF practices document that he said we'll put on the slides. He's asking online.
I didn't get the question.
Yeah, if I understand it right.
Yeah, it's here.
Answer given. Thank you, Santosh. Good.
Okay. Please.
If I could also ask you to go back to the slide where you had those 4 principles. Yes.
Oh, the key challenges, yes.
Oh, key challenges. So do you also have some internal guidance or what is your idea on balancing some of these contradictory goals that you have there? So like, yeah, the growth of IoT and the sustainability at the same time.
I think it's important to realize that IoT is there to help sustainability as well. So IoT devices may be a little bit polluting, but as a system, they can contribute on the other side in, for instance, here in Rotterdam, the harbor is full of IoT devices sniffing the air, warning if things go wrong. The traffic around Rotterdam is tremendous, so dynamic management systems help keep that flowing. So this is an investment. It's extra materials that we use and extra energy we use. Yet at the same time, if you do that, let's do it in the most conscious way, where we keep the material use down and the energy use down, and keep into account what it delivers as well.
I agree, and I heard that you mentioned hackathons. So the last time we had a meeting in Rotterdam, we actually held an IoT hackathon too. So, and I'm interested in maybe working together to organize the next one where we could focus more on sustainability and IoT for in the future. So, thank you.
Very much so. And sustainability is also something we need to build in from design nowadays, and there's projects working on that.
Wow. Yeah, thank you so much, Martin, for this great insight. Very, very good talk. Okay, could you just switch to the first presentation? Thank you. All right. Okay. So I know the people of you who have subscribed to the RIPE IoT mailing list of this working group, I think you are aware that this working group was never a very active working group. Like, let's say, address policy as a good example, where there's a lot of things going on. So this working group released the BCOP document, the RIPE 7959. There was a good collaboration with working group members, but afterwards, again, activity died down. So Santosh and I, we thought it might be a good idea to use this forum to ask you, as people who work with IoT, what we could do. So we were thinking about reasons. So, I mean, the working group charter, I put it here, it has a very, very broad scope. So it tries to cover everything about IoT. And one question was, is this maybe too broad? Should we select certain areas in IoT where we focus on to have more activity, more active participation in the working group? And also a question, should we work more closely with other working groups? So we have maybe some overlapping fields. I had a conversation yesterday with the chair of the IPv6 working group, where we might have connecting points for the thread protocol, which is now used to standardize IoT IP communication. So there could be connections with other working groups to create new activities. Also, I think Martin's talk was very, very interesting in analyzing, but maybe we can collaborate more closely with other organizations like the IGF or the IETF. So from my side, it's just a question to you, being here, also to the members of the working group, if you have any ideas, any input, what you think we could do better in the future. Okay. Well, I mean, it is what it is. I just wanted to raise that topic. Oh, yeah.
Hi, Peter. This is Peter Koch from DNIC. I agree with your assessment, basically, and also with the suggestions and finding the connections to other groups inside and outside the RIPE community, like what is happening in the IGF, what is happening maybe in the IETF, and we've had examples of that. I don't think, though, that fiddling with the charter is at this point going to help. The charter is broad, which is okay. We would have to narrow it down where we struck with a load of proposals that you would have to fend off. That's not the case. Focus on initiative can come within the charter, and even if the charter as broad as it is, we can pick things and work on those. In the history of, like the founding history of the working group, there was, for example, the work that is going on or was started in the ITU study group 20, for example. That would be interesting to learn about in this venue. And also, as we learned in other sessions 2 days before, giving operator input to protocol development is one thing. The other is that we have lots of operators experienced with IP and IP, like ITF suite protocols. Lots of the protocol development for IoT is happening in completely other venues. And I think it would be important to connect the two, and this could be one possible venue to start this, which you already did with the first presentation, I think. So that is, in my opinion, it's a good start, and just follow that route without losing the confidence in the charter. That is okay. Just keep on that work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Hi, Peter, Jim Reed. I'm going to start by saying is I agree with pretty much everything Peter has just said. And as Peter and I have a running joke is that we rarely agree about anything. So that's rather remarkable. I think it's good to have these little bits of discussions about, where this working group is headed, what it should be doing, what people think might be useful and so on. I think it's helpful to have those conversations, but I don't think we should be overly concerned about that. The fact that the working group mailing list is relatively quiet, there's been not much in terms of activity after the BCOP was published, and that's okay. I wouldn't worry about this. I mean, if you look at some of the other RIPE working groups, their traffic isn't all that high either on the mailing lists. They don't produce documents. So it's not necessarily a failing of the working group. We shouldn't be too concerned about it. The fact there are so many people in the room just now tells you that the working group is serving a useful purpose. So let's not forget that. And as Peter rightly pointed out, I think probably one of the good things about the working group is it can serve as a focus to get details of what's going on in other fora, who's talking about IoT, for example, say at the ITU or maybe at the ITF, what's being discussed inside government and regulatory fora. All these kind of things are useful, and we could act almost like the information exchange for that, because it's too hard for everybody to try and keep track of everything that's going on in all these different places. And of course, IoT means just about anything to anybody, which just adds to the whole notion of vagueness and the fuzziness around this whole topic. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that. I think also we shouldn't try to think about wordsmithing the charter. That sort of rings alarm bells to me, because as soon as we start going down that path, we're just doing inward-looking navel gazing, and we're doing wordsmithing rather than actually getting down to things that really matter or really significant. And when the working group was started, the charter was designed to be intentionally vague. The whole purpose was, well, we don't know what things might develop, or how things might come along in the future. So let's leave things as open as possible in order to accommodate how this whole scenario might unfold over the coming years. So I wouldn't worry about the fact that the charter is too vague, and I don't think changing the charter will improve the amount of traffic we get in the mailing list or the number of documents we produce. So I don't think that's really necessarily a solution to the problem. If we think there's even a problem there, and to my mind, I don't think there is a problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Neil O'Reilly, RIPE Vice Chair. I don't want to contradict anything that Peter or Jim have said, especially since they're in agreement. But I would add a little thing. Different working groups have from time to time different focuses. And within the existing charter, any of those focuses could be a next good one or a number of parallel next good ones for this working group. I'm thinking of the information exchange idea that Jim mentioned, the kind of capacity building approach that we see in the DNS working group. There might be specific policy window things such as Martin was talking to us about earlier. So as I said, don't necessarily focus on the charter, but find something interesting to do. I think the charter is broad enough or find one or two things interesting to do, but choose what you'd like to do between this and the next or the after next RIPE meeting. And I'm sure the charter is broad enough to fit it.
Thank you very much, Neil. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. So thank you very much for your input. When reading the charter, there was, I think, an interesting point we can also work on, because there is a point to serve as a focal point for the RIPE NCC regarding community input. And I think this is not a one-way road. I remember in the past we had at the working group sessions always a RIPE NCC update with interesting developments, what's going on the regulatory side, etc. So this exchange might also help us to also better serve the community. Please, Jim.
Yeah, good point. Good point, Peter. We have to remember that this was the reason the IT working group was originally formed, because NCC staff being asked questions and things like the roundtable meetings, what does the community or what does the RIPE NCC think about IoT this or IoT that? And they didn't have any kind of mechanism to consult with the community and get views and be able to represent those views in those meetings and stuff like that. So the fact that the working group exists gives the chance for the community across the RIPE region to be able to come together, express points of view and give some guidance to the NCC when they have to make those cases or make those presentations, for example, in EU meetings or wherever. So that's another important reason for the continued work of the working group as it is at the moment. Remember that we're not just about trying to discuss and make information about what's happening in the IoT world, but to help the ISC when they're playing the layer 9 politics stuff.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that was great input. So I think it will help us a lot moving forward. Let's, come to the last point. We're slightly over time, but this is also important. So as I already mentioned, so Sandor's term as a co-chair is ending with this RIPE meeting. First of all, I really want to thank Sander from my heart for the work he was doing over those years, for the community, for this working group. Amazing job. Thank you so much, Sander.
Thank you, Peter. I would like to just say one or two words here. I would love to be there at Rotterdam, but due to some personal emergency, I had to go back to India. So the last 4 years as co-chair of the IoT working group has been an exciting journey for me. I've learned a lot of things. I would love to thank the community, especially my current co-chair, Peter, and previous co-chairs that I worked with, Jim Red and Constance. I'd also like to thank RIPE NCC for the support, and I hope to see you around during the next RIPE meetings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sander. Okay, so fortunately, the last point on my slide is wrong. So in the last minute, Peter Werle stepped up and asked to become a co-chair of the IoT working group. So he's quite new and ripe. So I think he will appreciate our support. And Peter, maybe you want to say a few words about yourself.
So hello, as Peter said, I'm quite new to RIPE, so it's my first RIPE, and IoT is one of the passions, and open for being connected. The green dot. So my background is a degree in communication engineering, so that is about electronics, digital signal processing, while my professional life is mainly on the IT of business applications. So I had various companies in the telecommunication industry where I ran the business support systems. And the passion for the IoT comes from hobby. So I'm a radio amateur. And so we have to connect the generations. No? So that is, there's the one side where you have the radio signals, all the experience there about antenna, how to get signals through. On the other side, you have the young kids, they have a handheld, so why radio? And so they are more about a Raspberry Pi doing embedded computing, decoding sensors, while you come to sensors, and then there's the old electronics, how to save energy. So there's a lot of combinations, and I'm running a exhibition once a year in Germany where we put this together more and more to the radio amateurs and the makers to do a lot of projects. And there's a lot of common things on the IoT, and I just looked up, so nobody wants to step up for IoT. So I found the appreciation just right now, and also from my side, I looked up, so there are more double time IoT devices around than humans on Earth, so that can't be an unimportant subject. And so that is a base. Whenever you look for smart resource consumption, energy like photovoltaic, and you have your car and you try to match energy generation and consumption together, maybe with your heating at home. So you optimize resources. We have the resources we have today. We have to be very careful to optimize them, and whatever you have as a smart idea, you need to have data from the environment. You put them clearly together, and that is my passion, which I bring in. So I'm not from a professional background on any IoT companies, but I'm happy to start a networking and to bring some new spirit into there from the hobby, and to put together telecoms, electronic, and all the stuff.
Thank you very much, Peter. Greatly appreciated. And I think passion is the best thing you can bring as a co-chair and a member of this working group. So welcome, Peter, as the new co-chair of the working group. I'll do my best to support you.
Okay.
Help you.
I just heard that a few people have not subscribed, so please subscribe. You can go via the the main page and then really subscribe to the mail list, and we stay in contact, and then we find also some sweet spots where we are really interested in and get the exchange running. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, this brings us to the end of our session. First of all, I want to thank our scribe, as always, doing a great job here. Also want to thank the team from the RIPE NCC to make the technology happen and fixed everything in the last minute. And of course, all the attendees, your input, and yeah, hopefully seeing all of you on RIPE 87 in fall. Thank you so much.
that to, I mean, we'll set it, Hello, 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 hello. Good afternoon to you. And welcome to the RIPE 86 edition of the Anti-Abuse Working Group. It is very lovely to see you all. There's more lights now, so I'm not sure if that's improved or disimproved. It's all good. Anyway, there are people. It's the right time, so we shall start this working group session. I'm Brian Nisbet, and along with the other two co-chairs, Marcus de Bruin and Tobias Knecht, we'll be taking you through this hour of working group. So done the welcome. I wish to thank the NCC staff and the venue staff for all of their ops and scribing and all of the assistance there. Very welcome. And of course, our wonderful stenographers, without whom we would not in any way remember what happened last. This meeting is being recorded and streamed and all of that jazz. For those of you who are joining us on Meet Echo, please remember that the things you say in chat are things you said in chat. They are not questions and they will not be read out. There is a nice Q&A function there that we can help you with, or indeed you can request mic and video access if you wish to ask a question or make a point that way, or whatever you wish to do. This meeting, like all of this meeting, is covered under the code of conduct. Yay, we have a full code of conduct and a team. This is rather wonderful. I realize I'm biased, but you know, it's awesome. So please be aware of that. You can rate the talks. This is not a plenary session. This is a working group, but you can give us feedback, and that feedback is useful. You can use the same system, the RIPE 86 system, to give us feedback on any of the work items, talks, presentations, discussions, etc. So it is there, and feedback is good, but you can also talk to any of us at the meeting, of course, as well about these things. So we have some minutes from RIPE 85 that we circulated. People seem happy with them, but this is the official question of, are people happy with them? Seeing no objections to the minutes, I am going to declare them accepted, and we are all good. We published an agenda, but again, are there any items that anyone would like to add to the agenda at this point in time? Again, seeing nothing, we shall go ahead with the agenda, but there is an AOB section at the end if something suddenly strikes you, if you are moved by the divine will to talk about it. So on to our update section. Recent list discussion. There hasn't been a lot of it. There has been some things. I don't think the co-chairs have any points we need to make about the recent list discussion, but if anybody would like to talk about anything, raise anything, ask any questions, now is your moment. Nope. In which case we shall move on further, and we shall go to our first update, which is from Gerardo Vivier of the RIPE NCC about the anti-abuse training webinar, which has been running now, which is a wonderful, wonderful initiative. So I believe, yes, if I look over to my left, I can see Gerardo, who, due to the immense travel distance, has decided to join us online. So, Gerardo, if you want to take it away.
Yes, thank you, Brian, and welcome everybody. I'm going to try to share my slides, though they don't appear to be available. So I think I will have to share my screen. Oh, well. 1 second, please.
Yeah, so if you want to share the screen, that's fine. You did upload them, so you did everything you're supposed to do. Yeah,
I did everything right. I feel like I'm being abused. Okay, yeah. I'll have to share the screen. And oop, there we go. Can you see my slides? Yes.
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to be presenting an update on the anti-abuse training that the RIPE NCC developed in collaboration with the anti-abuse working group. Now, first of all, for those of you that don't know what this training is about, we were approached by the working group to provide this type of information for any new LAR that was signing up or opening an LAR with the RIPE NCC. And this is because the internet works because everybody coordinates the efforts together. And newcomers to the internet might not know what to do with these abuse reports that they might be receiving. And so by providing training to them, we figured out that this was the most effective way of sharing this knowledge and allowing to participate on the internet and to play with each other in a fair and square way. Now, we noticed during the development that also maybe some old timers might benefit from this knowledge and these skills too. So mostly we're targeting the new LARs, but this information might be also helpful for the old timers, as we call them, people who have already been there before the training. Training is split actually in two parts. The first part is providing motivation, and that is the why should I actually deal with these abuse reports, and what is it to me? Why is it relevant for me? We start by trying to define abuse and finding out how challenging it is because of all the different situations where the operators might be located, like the country, regulations, and stuff like that. We go on to explain why dealing with these abuse reports is important for everybody. And of course, pointing out the benefits of taking action and the consequences of not taking action when you receive an abuse report. The second part of the webinar is, or the training, is providing instruction. So what can you do about these things? We start by defining what is an abuse desk, what's its purpose, the whole abuse handling process, how to set up an abuse desk, what should you do to get one running, and then providing some information about tools and services that can help in the whole abuse handling process. So this is a quick look at what the training is about. We do really appreciate feedback and input from people. So if you haven't been to the training yet or to the webinar, please do join the next session and let us know what you think and how we can improve it. So since RIPE 85, the last time that I presented on this training, we delivered our first webinar in January of this year. We had quite a good turnout, and we got quite a lot of good feedback. That was our first version, and we worked on it based on this feedback, updated the material, and then did a second webinar in April of this year as well. That one was also really well attended, and we got some really good feedback on the quality and the content. And this gives us, of course, the confidence to continue and know that we're on the right path. Now, what's going to happen further? Well, we're going to continue delivering the webinar, gathering feedback from the participants as we go, and updating and or evaluating and updating the material to see if it fits the needs of the working group and of the target audience. We presented just recently at the PLNOG 31 a short version of this training, and we got also some good feedback there, actually some really interesting reactions. There was a couple of people who have been in the business for quite a while, and they didn't have any abuse desk, so it was interesting for them to hear about all this stuff that they didn't know about. So basically that is it. Are there any questions from the masses that are gathering there in the room?
So, questions,
No?
suggestions, ideas? We're all very happy with this. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, is this the direction that the working group wants us to take?
I mean, in the absence of disagreement, I think, you know, it's great to see this. It's great to see it exist in reality. And I want to thank you and the team and the people in the working group who gave input to it. And I think this is hopefully going to be an evolving piece that we can that will change over time and improve further over time.
We hope so too. We're open to any suggestions, and if the working group wants us to go in a different direction, we are more than happy to comply.
Okay. Well then, in that case, great stuff, Gerda. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. So, I moved this around. This is my own fault. So I'm going to talk briefly about the RIPE database task force outputs. And now we talked about this in Belgrade, and there is an output there around relationship with law enforcement and the RIPE database. In Belgrade, we didn't come up with anything concrete that the working group wanted to do or felt was the right direction or otherwise. Part of this and part of the response to that is the next piece around the NCC handling LEA requests and where we are with that. But myself and Marcus and Tobias were talking earlier and essentially kind of talking about ways that the working group might be able to help the NCC with that, might be able to help the LEAs with that, and indeed obviously moving towards the recommendations from the task force. I'm going to ask again and I foolishly left out the slide which has the details of the recommendation, but ask again if anyone in the room has any input they wish to make to that. And without that, the three of us will have a chat, and I think we'll try and come up with something for the mailing list to see if we have any ideas. But it's not all on the co-chairs. This is again a working group, and if the working group wants to do things, it's not just the co-chairs who are doing it. So we will be asking for assistance with anything we end up doing in that regard. So are there any people who wish to make any comments there? Nope. Okay, that's cool. Zed will come back on that. So, but as the first part, and I think a good segue from that, we have Theodoros from the NCC to talk about how the RIPE NCC handles LEA requests. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. My name is Theodoros Filaridis, and I'm legal counsel in the RIPE NCC. And today, I will give you a short presentation on the way that RIPE NCC handles requests it receives from law enforcement agencies, in short, LEAs. As you can see, the agenda of this presentation is the following. First of all, I will give you a short background on the role of the RIPE NCC and how and why this is relevant to the LEAs. Then I will walk you through the different types of requests we receive and how we deal with each of them. And finally, I will highlight some interesting facts from LEA Transparency Report 2022, which is a report that includes data regarding the requests we received during the past year. So to begin with, the RIPE NCC in its role as RIR has, among others, a mandate to administer both publicly available and confidential information relating to either number resources on behalf of its members and the Indian community. Now, this can be rather interesting for the LEAs, and more specifically, they may have an interest in obtaining such information or intervening in the RIPE NCC's services. The RIPE NCC, when this happens, strives to protect the interests of its members and will neither provide any confidential information to LEAs, nor will allow them to modify the registration information without a court order or other legally enforceable order or request under Dutch law. And let's move to the first type of request. This is the request for information. And as you will see, it's divided in three different subcategories. The first of these subcategories is request for information that is publicly available. This information, the publicly available information, can always be accessed by third parties, including, of course, LEAs, and is actual information that is accessible through the RIPE NCC website, including information or records that are public on the RIPE database. Therefore, when we receive such requests from an LEA, we direct them to this information, and we also provide additional information on the public registry or on how the RIPE NCC operates in general. Information on RIPE NCC operations in general. The next type of information of request is request for information that is not publicly available. And it's really important to note here that such information will not be voluntarily provided by the RIPE NCC. Our activities are international, but as you know, we are based in the Netherlands. So these activities are exclusively governed by Dutch law. So in this, when we receive such a request, we will only provide information if a court order or other legally binding order is presented to us by a Dutch LEA or by a Dutch authority that has the power to request such information. For example, the Dutch Data Protection Authority, the police, the Public Prosecution Department. When it comes to non-Dutch LEAs, they must follow the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaties procedures in order to make the request, their order enforceable in the Netherlands and thus binding for us. So in practice, if there is a foreign court order, it has to be recognized in the Netherlands via this procedure. And once this happens, it becomes enforceable for us. And we will handle it further. Each of those requests is examined on its own merits. And we will challenge it and will not comply with it if it is found illegal or if it is of non-obligatory nature. And we will challenge it before the competent authorities or the relevant court. And as per our policies, we notify our members regarding these requests relating to their information, unless this is prohibited by statute or court order. And the third subcategory from this type is the information, is a request for information that the RIPE NCC does not have. And this is the vast majority of the requests we receive, actually. In practice, we receive a request regarding information about the users of specific IP addresses. When this happens, we inform the requesting LEA that the RIPE NCC is responsible for allocating IP address blocks to its members and has no further information about jurisdiction over or responsibility for how the allocated IP addresses are used. So in these cases, the LEA is directed to the publicly available information and is instructed how to locate in the RIPE database the member responsible for the IP address in question. And we move on to the next type of request we receive, is the request or orders for a specific action. What does it mean in practice? It means that an LEA may request the RIPE NCC to perform specific action, for example, modification in the registration of specific internet number resources. Similar to what we discussed before, we will only comply with such court order if it's presented by a Dutch LEA or Dutch authorities that have the power to submit such requests. Non-Dutch LEAs will again have to follow the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaties procedure to make their order enforceable in the Netherlands. We will challenge its order. We will examine its order at its own merits, and if we find it is illegal or of non-obligatory nature, we will not comply with it. And we'll of course notify our members unless there is a court order or statute that prohibits us from doing so. And we move on to the next type of request we may receive, and this is a request for seizure of RIPE NCC's equipment or property as part of investigation. And I said we may receive because until today this procedure hasn't been applied in practice, because we haven't received such a request until today. But we have it in place in case this happens. So we may receive an order for seizure of equipment or property belonging to the RIPE NCC as part of investigation, for example, a criminal investigation. Now, when this happens, the legitimacy of this order will end the authorization of the persons conducting the investigation, for example, the examining judge or the investigation officer, will be examined. We will, of course, ensure that the seizure is conducted in a manner that is the least detrimental to the RIPE NCC's operations and, of course, the operations of our members. And we'll afterwards lodge a complaint with the court and will seek to secure an agreement from the relevant authority that it will await the outcome of the complaint before carrying out the actual seizure. And with that, I conclude the first part of my presentation regarding the types of requests we receive and how we deal with them. And now we will move on to the LUA Transparency Report for 2022. During the past year, we received 186 LEA requests, which is a significantly higher number compared to the previous years. It is in fact the highest number we ever received in a year. As a matter of comparison, during the period 2016 to 2021, the highest number of requests in a year was 60. So this is more than 3 times the highest until last year. Out of these requests, 2 of them were legally binding from Dutch LEAs for non-public information, to which we complied as we were obliged to do. 2 were requests from non-Dutch LEAs on whether we would comply with foreign courts' orders or search warrants. 3 were requests on how to send an official request to the RIPE NCC to inquire information about IP addresses. 2 of them were requests for information not related to the RIPE NCC. And finally, as I said before, the vast majority of those, 177 requests for information for the identification of users of particular IP addresses, is the type of information that the RIPE NCC does not have, as said before. This big increase can be explained by the high number of requests not for information not available to the RIPE NCC we received from a French LEA. Now, despite the fact that our role and the procedures we apply when handling with LEA requests was explained, we repeatedly kept receiving requests for the same type of information from the same party. But in general, LEAs seem to acknowledge the RIPE NCC's role and procedures relating to handling LEA requests. And also when they also understand when we advise them that we either do not have information or we need a Dutch court order to provide non-confidential information. On the following graph, you can see the LEA requests we received by type of request during the past 5 years. You can see the big increase I just talked to you about. And also you can see that the vast majority of the requests are actually for information that we do not have. And in this final graph, you can see the LEA requests received by country. The greener the color of the country, the more requests we received from the said country. In total, we received requests from 19 jurisdictions. And as I said, most of them, in fact, to be precise, 121 came from France. And with this, I conclude my presentation. Are there any questions? I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, I'm going to stand behind this table and not in front of this microphone, which is this speaker. Wow, that got people thinking. Okay, please.
Alex Yoder from AMS-X. I think you're familiar with the e-evidence package that's going around in the Commission, which will allow European law enforcement agencies to directly request data, and you will have to supply this.
I think this is something that my colleagues will answer more properly.
Hi, Maria Stafila, Senior Legal Counsel at RIPE NCC. Indeed, we are following this file and the adoption process. It has been agreed, and we will update our procedures accordingly in order to reflect the required changes.
Thank you, Maria.
Markus de Bruyn relaying a question from the Meet Echo from Robert Scheck.
Is it possible that the RIPE NCC publishes the LEA requests with sensitive details removed for more transparency on the NCC website? Similar like email providers like posteo.de or mailbox.org are doing. We publish the LEA transparency report every year, and we also send it to the anti-abuse working group mailing list. And then we, as it was my presentation, we just talk about the numbers of requests, the countries they came from, and if I understand the question correctly, is it about a more detailed report?
Yeah,
for that?
seems to be about taking the email and removing the relevant details and actually publishing the redacted email.
We do not do it yet, but we can think about it, and we can follow up on that.
Okay, please.
Hi, Henrik Kramslund from Copenhagen, Denmark, representing myself as a small company, freelance with my own network. I have a question about the sources of the LEA requests. Are they coming directly from the countries, or are they coming via Interpol? And also the French LEA, was that a proper French, or is it an international one based in France?
Thank you for your question. No, the requests are coming directly from the LEAs. And in this case, all of them were coming from the actual French LEA based in France.
Can I add a small one? If they're sending 121, that's almost harassment if they don't change their procedures and keep on asking for the same stuff.
Well, as I said, we explained many times the procedures that we follow, but we still keep getting this request. So you can, I don't know if it can be regarded as harassment, but that's the case. And it's a recent phenomenon. It started last year.
Hi, Dennis Walker, co-chair of the database working group. For those cases that you actually responded to, without going into details on the specific cases, can you say anything about what type of information they were actually asking you for?
Well, as I said, it's not public information, so everything that is not on the right database, and I don't know to which extent am I allowed to disclose what this information is.
But can you say what type of information they were asking for? Was it names, was it addresses, was it personal information, or?
There was personal information involved. There were also addresses, there were also names. But as I said, this type of information, when we receive this type of request, because our activities are governed by Dutch law, we can challenge it to a certain extent, but if there is no room for us to maneuver, then we have to comply and then provide this information.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Peter?
Peter Gordiening. Thank you for the presentation and the continued effort to support the transparency here, and also for being open for questions. I have one clarifying question, and maybe that was covered by the previous speaker, but I didn't really comprehend. You said that your procedure says for all non-Dutch LEAs, MLETs are the one thing that opens the sesame. Did I understand correctly that none actually used the MLET procedure, or did any foreign request come through an MLET and then was either refused afterwards or served?
At least during the past year, we did not receive foreign request that was recognized in the Netherlands and afterwards enforced here, but it has happened in the past.
Okay, thank you. I have a second question on on that French LEA, without asking you to disclose, but I wonder, what is the NCC doing about this?
Besides informing them continuously about our procedures, we still respond to every one of those requests. We give our response and explain our procedure, but then it happens again. So
okay. Thank you.
Seems like a perfect use of AI. Sorry, at the back microphone, please.
Hey there, Harry Cross, talking in my own capacity.
I noticed there were a couple where the NCC received a request on how to request something. Did those ever materialize into anything? If you're allowed to say.
I'm not sure. I can't recall. I don't think there was a follow-up on those specific, at least those three I talked about during the past year. There was no follow-up. We just received the question, what should we do in order to request comments from you? We responded. There was no follow-up.
And a sort of adjacent point on that, where the NCC doesn't have the information, is there any sort of signposting done if that's kind of within an educational remit, or is it just a hands up, we don't have the data, thank you for asking?
We basically say we do not have the data, we explain our role, and we give a short explanation on why we don't have it. And then we instruct them how to use the RIPE database to locate the member responsible for the IP address they're looking for.
Okay, so there is a sort of signposting off to that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, I think, and I don't wish to speak for the NCC here, and I can't, but this answer of how to do this has been given to law enforcement agencies for over a decade, Athena, I think at this point in time. We've been,
I presume this is what's hammered home during the roundtables and things.
Yeah, but it is certainly something that in my experience, and again, not in any way speaking for the NCC, is something that has to be hammered home again and again and again, for all the reasons that large organizations don't do good knowledge transfer, etc. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Malcolm.
Thank you. Malcolm Hutty, Concerned Citizen. First of all, thank you for that presentation. Actually, I thought it was a great model of transparency. I'd love to see more of this sort of thing from other organizations on which we all depend, shall I say. Building on the question of a previous speaker about the nature of the information, I would have imagined that the NCC holds very limited information at all that is of a non-public nature that would be available to such a potentially responsive to such a request. I can imagine that maybe the payment information might potentially be a category that would fall into that. Presumably the NCC has done a review of what information it actually holds and whether it needs to hold various types of information as part of its own ordinary GDPR compliance things. Is there anything that you think, without going into the details of these requests, categories of information that the NCC holds that is non-public that might be illuminating to this working group that we might not have realized that you hold that might be relevant to the discussion? Or is it actually, no, there's very little there?
Again, we can provide only what we have. And
my question is about what you have, which is
yes.
A more GDPR type inquiry, I suppose. Well, yes, yes. Do you, for example, collect and record usage information for the online services? Maybe I should follow this up afterwards, but possibly if you want to expand the transparency area, perhaps some clarity on, or
yeah, maybe Athena will jump in. Yeah,
Athena to the rescue.
Thank you very much for this question, Malcolm. Actually, yes, it's a very good question. So far, we haven't.
Sorry, Athena, can you just say who you?
Oh yeah, Athena Fraguli, Chief Legal Officer, RIPE NCC. So far, LEA requests we've received are interested in resource holder information that are related to this activity of them being resource holders, pretty much. And they are not publicly available. So anyone that has resources with the NCC and their members, they know what kind of information they've shared themselves for the purposes of the contract and for the purposes of the execution of all the requirements of the contract. So no user data have been shared.
So So this is information that is collected in the course of submitting forms and so forth, and not other information that the NCC has generated itself.
So far, that's correct, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you very much. Any other questions, discussion? Nothing in chat. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yay for transparency. It's a good and happy thing. Although I was missing the opportunity for you to tell us just everything you know about Malcolm. That could have been just a great working group moment. So our next speaker is Dan Owen from the Global Cyber Alliance, who will be telling us all about domain trust and the work that they are doing. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dan Owen. I do work for the Global Cyber Alliance. I'm the product manager for domain trust. This is my first RIPE meeting, hopefully not my last. There's the slides. So I'd like for you to, we're going to be talking about domain abuse today. I know that may not be front and center for most of you, but please, as we go through the presentation, think about people in your organization that may be interested in that and share this information with them, please. So the Global Cyber Alliance is a nonprofit dedicated to making the internet a safer place. We do that through building programs, products, tools, partnerships, and communities. And today, what I'd like to announce is we're building a new community to combat domain abuse. Much like RIPE started in 1989, we're starting in hopes that we can build a community of like-minded folks that come from disparate organizations across multiple sectors globally to help us address this problem. We are a nonprofit, again, in the US, UK, and Belgium. And we focus our efforts in two particular ways. One for end users, where we provide toolkits. And for the infrastructure operators, we like to try to help solve big problems that nobody can really solve on their own. So our Internet Integrity Program is focused, again, on infrastructure operators and operations to identify these priorities that cannot be solved by any single actor. You need a village sometimes. You need people together to work on these things. Two particular projects within our Internet Integrity Program, our AID program, our AID product, which is focused on IoT, and domain trust, which is what we're talking about today. The community has actually already been established. We have about 45 participants in that community over the last couple of years. It's very globally diverse, and everyone has a shared concern about domain abuse. When we say domain abuse, what we're specifically talking about is phishing, malware, command and control activities like botnets. We do have some information about fraud and IP infringement and things like that in our purview, but that's not our primary focus. Probably most importantly is that this is a neutrally convened community. GCA acts as that neutral convener. We don't take a side, if you will. We simply want to bring together the people that have an interest in domain abuse, fighting that, reducing it, and creating a safe, secure, trustworthy space for them to have these community discussions. At the end of the day, the goal is simply to increase the integrity of the internet by decreasing the number and the impact of the domains that are registered for cybercrime and other purposes that are malicious. We need to get out in front of this at the beginning. And I'll show you a little bit more about that, why that is in a minute. We started collecting data in 2020, and since then our community members have contributed more than 10 million malicious domains into our database. Those are unique malicious domains. We've got about 28 million instances. So there's reporting from a lot of different people on the same domains, as you can imagine. And this data is used for a lot of different purposes. One that you would expect is that when a bad domain is causing a lot of trouble, you want to take that down, you want to block it, you want to do what you can to reduce the impact that it's causing. But that takes time, that takes energy, that takes coordination. And again, we need to try to find ways to stop that at the earlier stages. But we also use the data to build AI algorithms. One of our partners is doing that and doing it very well. They're predictive in domains that are going to be used for malicious purposes. They've had some really good success stories already. And then we also work with research institutions academically to try to further this cause. To give you a little bit of a sample of our data, the little blue dots represent a varying number of domains for each registrar. This was taken from about a week's worth of takedown data from one of the resolvers. If you'll notice, the mean is, if you can read it, 199 days for the average number of, for the total number, if you will, of the domains associated with that particular registrar. So from the time it's been reported as malicious, we've got about 6 months before we see that domain, any action being taken on that domain on average. Some registrars are much better than others in responding to those kinds of activities. But again, the proof here is it takes too long. There's too much damage that can be done in that 6-month period, which is why we want to get to the left of this and be able to start looking at ways that we can collectively influence the community to start reducing the number of these domains that are registered initially for malicious purposes. And there are indicators for that. It can be easy to identify some of those. To give you an idea of who our participants are, we have, and this is not a full list by any means, but it's just representative examples. I met someone here from Switch Cert. Switch is part of our community as well. We encourage all organizations out there that are looking at anti-abuse in the DNS space to participate with what we're doing. So the DNS Abuse Institute, which I know they briefed a couple of years ago, this working group. We work with EcoTop DNS. We work with Youth Protect out of Germany, a lot of others. If you look at this slide, these are the kinds of categories of organizations that we're looking for. If we're missing a category, please let me know. If you're part of this category and you want to be included, please let me know. We're welcoming any and all participants that fit within these categories, and we're interested in making sure that we're not leaving anyone out that should be there. The community meets quarterly to discuss best practices, to discuss data, to discuss new initiatives in the fight against domain abuse. We have working groups that meet monthly. Our working group chairs are actually here in the room. And we're looking specifically at the data, how to assess and analyze that, but then also looking at best practices for taking action. What can we do? What can be done to reduce the number and impact of these domains that are being registered? So again, I want to welcome anyone that wants to participate with us. We hope that this will be a sustainable, self-sustainable community over time, and look forward to any kind of questions you may have, and I'm happy to hang around during the lunch break afterwards if anyone would like to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Apparently we do have questions, gosh.
Well,
this is,
it may be a statement and it may be a question. Hi, I'm Trey Darley, Accenture Security, Belgium day job, first board of directors, hobby speaking strictly for myself.
Sure.
Two things. You know, there's a special interest group, a SIG, within FIRST that's defined a DNS abuse taxonomy. Are you familiar with this work?
Right, and we've just recently joined.
Super. So for those who may not know, there's basically a sort of a standard way of, if you say across border, there's domain abuse happening, to characterize precisely, there's a huge international consortium that's been about 4 or 5 years. I've been part of this effort, talking through in minute detail, you know, how do we categorize all the different spectrum of domain abuse? So now there's this sort of matrix that's been translated into, and it's being translated into a number of other languages. So hopefully that'll help bring your your mean takedown, you know, if you're talking with somebody, say in the Philippines, who English isn't their native language, and you're talking about something really specific, to be able to say, oh, but it's square 423, and then they, you know, so we're working to improve that. We should work together on that.
Yeah.
Also, first is putting together a kind of coordinated takedown system within our community, and we should try to find standardized ways to, you know, maybe define a standard for takedown requests that can propagate between trust communities. That might be worth exploring offline. So I guess that was a statement and an offer of help.
And that's fine. And those are the kinds of conversations that we like to have in the community about the best practices. What are other members of that community doing that are working?
Thank you for a
well.
great presentation.
Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Anything else, folks?
Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Dan. Right. So that largely concludes the agenda. But does anybody have any other business they would like to raise with the working group? Seeing no flood of people standing up to the microphones. I will then, in which case, I will mention, obviously we'll be having another anti-abuse working group session at RIPE 87, wherever it may be, much later this year. And we'll be reminding the mailing list about, you know, about agenda items, but obviously if anybody has anything now or anything they'd like to talk about, myself and Marcus and Tobias will be around this week. Please come talk to us. We're very friendly. And with that, I will say thank you again to all of the folks who actually, you know, make this working group, this instantiation of the working group happen. The AV folks, the NCC staff, both operationally and minutes, and our stenographers, and of course all of you, the working group, both here and afar. And I will say that, you know, one of the things is that now, because the hybrid meetings are even better than they used to be, as we saw with Gerardo, you can present just as easily from a city relatively nearby. No, you can just as easily from anywhere on the internet as you can in the room. So thank you all very much. And on behalf of myself and Tobias and Marcus, we will see you next time. Have a good day.